Chapter 758. Frost Wrm Shida is the gatekeeper of the Holy Cathedral of the Hibernator. I think Erek is also aware of this. Any stranger approaching the Holy Cathedral of the Hibernator will cause a reaction from the gatekeeper, Brando replied. You're saying that Erek will definitely take advantage of this. I've heard people say that this old fox is cautious and deep. He's used to planning before acting, just like the previous Duke. Veronica raised her head, her emerald green eyes flashing with a cold light. Although her hands covered her long hair, her blue hair still fluttered in the sun with the biting north wind. Her gaze passed through the ice field as if she had already seen the outcome that Brando expected, but she still asked, although I agree with this point, how do you plan to confirm it? Brando saw the snowflakes rolled up by the wind, floating on the glacier like a layer of powder. At this time, in his field of vision, a few shadowy figures suddenly appeared behind the snow and wind. He replied, We'll know soon. The figures that emerged from behind the ice fog were Babasha and her party. The old witch's body was stooped, and the ice wind was tugging at the corner of her shabby robe. Her silver hair was like a ghost baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. She limped to Brando's side and said with deep awe, Dear Lord, it's ready. She held the crystal ball with trembling hands and raised it to Brando. Veronica frowned when she saw this scene. She didn't like witches. Brando glanced at the few people behind Babasha. In addition to the girl wearing wooden shoes and standing there with her toes together holding a honey jar, there were two important figures, the inherited Witch of the Moon of Swords, Slaughter, Krull, and the inherited Witch of the Moon of Cups, Envy, Anwei. These two were important figures. Their status in the Witch Kingdom of Bunasan was far more respected than Babasha. Krull was a tall woman with a graceful body wrapped in a gray witch robe. She wore a hood. Her skin was as white as snow, her eyebrows were as thin as needles, her cheeks were prominent, and her expression was cold, giving people a feeling of indifference. Anwei, on the other hand, was like a woman in her 40s. She wore a thick fur robe, and her figure wrapped in the robe could be seen even through a thick layer of wool. The little woman's face was full of smiles, but it could not hide the shrewdness in her eyes. They said that they had come to seek refuge with Brando, but the latter realized that the attitude of the two was far less respectful than Babasha. This kind of seeking refuge was not so much a submission as an inspection. The inheritance of the Dark Dragon was divided into 7 parts, and he was not the only one. However, Brando didn't care. He was confident that he could make these unlikable fellows work for him. Brendel took the crystal ball, and a circular image immediately appeared on it. He saw that behind the snowstorm, there was a vast expanse of snow that stretched as far as the eye could see. He let his vision continue to move to the north, and the image immediately showed crisscrossing glacial gullies that looked like they were cut by swords. A crystal-like forest grew in the middle, and then there was a flat tundra. The wind blew across the ice and the snow formed ribbons that rolled forward. Shido and Veronica, as well as a few Kurlutzian nobles who followed from behind, watched this scene attentively. Detection spells were the witch's specialty, and even the astrologers who were proficient in prophecy spells could not compare to them. This power came from the blind girl Elaine, and everything in the past and future of the mortal world was reflected on the surface of the Abyss Lake. It was also said that the powerful witches could indeed detect a part of the cause and effect of the future. The spell of the crystal ball was controlled by Anwei. When Brando carefully observed the scene on the crystal ball, he also noticed the young woman. The other party was frowning slightly, but did not show any signs of exhaustion. The vision on the crystal ball was already a few miles away, which could only mean that the other party's strength was already at the peak of the gold level. Suddenly the picture flashed, and a group of people and horses trekking on the snowfield appeared in the icy wind. This group of people and horses were all wearing thick bearskin coats, holding a variety of weapons in their hands, and some of them were leading a dwarf horse. Brando looked at their attire and recognized that these were the Inhal people of the Erek Plateau. The Lantan Islands called them big-footed dwarves, but they were actually not dwarves but halflings or pygmies. It was said that Erek had a group of loyal Inhal dwarves in his hands, and it seemed that this should be the group in front of them. Halfling cavalry, they are Erek's people, Veronica also recognized at a glance. Brando, it seems that you guessed right again. This is not luck. Brando replied in a bad mood, but he is willing to use his own elites as cannon fodder. This guy Erek is really not an ordinary person. At this time, a series of footsteps came from the snow behind the three of them. Shido glanced back and found that it was their military officer group. Lady Veronica, I wonder if Brund and the others have arrived? Before the military officer group approached, the leading noble asked first. This guy was called Gerd, a core member of the Silver Leaf Arbitration Group from Cruz's Council of Elders. His identity to the outside world was that of an envoy, but in fact, his existence was to check and balance Veronica's power. This man was not a soldier, but he had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He looked more like a ruffian than the knight around him. He wore a gray deerskin coat and a hat on one side, with 3 white feathers on the edge of the hat to indicate his status as a marquis. However, he did not look like an elegant noble but more like a butcher. The one in charge here is not me, Gerd. If you have any questions you can ask the count next to me. Veronica narrowed her eyes at this guy and replied coldly. Her tone was very stiff, but this commander was actually not at odds with this repulsive guy in front of her. It was a tradition for soldiers not to associate with the nobles of the Senate. However, she did not expect Gerd to push his luck and replied arrogantly, I'm sorry, Lady Veronica, but I don't trust these Erewhon people. Veronica's face immediately turned cold. Brando also snorted coldly, You really don't know what's good for you. What did you say? I said you are a complete idiot. Brando did not have a good impression of the people of Cruz. Veronica was probably an exception, but he had never been a nice guy to others. He directly reprimanded, When Freya arrives at the scheduled attack location when to launch the attack, it is only related to me here. From now on, I am the supreme commander here, not Lady Veronica and not you. If you have any questions, I don't have to answer them to you. If you are not satisfied, you can take off your pair of squirrel gloves and throw them on me. I don't mind nailing a piece of trash like you to the ice here with my sword. When the blade pierces through your loose skin, I bet your blood will be frozen under your blood vessels before it can flow out. Brando released a trace of elemental energy and locked onto the group of officers, causing Gerd's face to turn pale. You. He gritted his teeth, but in the end, he did not dare to say the second half of the sentence. I hope you're right. Gerd suddenly remembered that this guy in front of him had killed Williams. He knew that he was not as respected as the deputy commander of the Holy Cathedral of Fire's Holy Knight Regiment. If Brando was really angry, killing him would be as easy as crushing an ant. Especially when he thought that the Holy Cathedral had lost a genius swordsman in Erewhon, but there was no mention of revenge. Brando's background was so deep that it made his hair stand on end. Veronica coldly watched the argument between the two, and when she saw Gerd flinch, she could not help but frown in disappointment. Although she did not want Brando to be defeated, the courage and accomplishment of the nobles of the Empire were really unsightly. Brando, are you sure? Veronica looked away from Gerd with some disgust and asked, Although the Folded Sword Knight Regiment is the elite of the Azure Skies Regiment, your little girl only has a little more than 100 people under her command. Look at these halfling cavalry, their number is at least a column. Cruz's establishment, 500 people. It's really difficult to destroy them all. In response to such a question, Brando only smiled. Don't worry, leave it to me. He turned back. Previously he had asked the Shire to find Alaz, and it had been a long time, so it should be about time. As expected, the crowd was in a commotion. Cruz's people seemed to be separated by an invisible force, automatically making a path, and the Shire appeared in everyone's sight with Alaz. The little female dragon looked impatient, looking at the people around her with her golden eyes, like a beast. Brando, you're looking for me? Alaz walked through the crowd. I heard that you've been in a bad mood recently, so I found some opponents for you to vent your anger on. What do you think? Brando replied with a smile. If you want me to help, just say it. If it's you, I can consider it. The little female dragon slowly walked through the crowd, and where she passed, the warhorses around her suddenly let out a whine, and these tall herbivores knelt down one after another. The ones on the periphery even collapsed to the ground, and a few even twitched on the ground, and in the blink of an eye, they foamed at the mouth and died. What did you do to our horses? The nobles of Cruz immediately objected. Excellent warhorses in Erewhon, in Cruz, and even in Saint Tassol and Fanzan, were luxuries worth showing off among the nobles. A noble breed of horse was more expensive than gold in the aristocratic circle, and it was also priceless, because no one would easily sell their beloved things. But it was these horses that were killed by Alaz's glare. Alaz looked at those guys coldly and replied, Your horses are in my way and I hate these smelly things, keep them away from me. You. The nobles were so angry that they almost fainted. Everyone turned their eyes to Brando, and Gerd, as if he had something on him, asked excitedly, Count, you'd better explain. You want me to explain? Brando only found it funny. Enough, Veronica interrupted. She frowned, feeling that the situation was getting out of hand. She faintly felt that there was something wrong with the little girl brought by the Ash Sword Saint. Alaz did not overwhelm the warhorses with witchcraft, but with her aura. She was the only one who noticed it. Lord Veronica, please don't be too partial to outsiders except for me, everyone here is your subordinate. What a warhorse means to a soldier, I'm sure you know better than I do. Gerd snorted coldly and replied somewhat proudly. Veronica looked at this guy as if she was looking at an idiot. If you want to die, then go ahead. What do you mean? Gerd was slightly taken aback. In his impression, this Legion commander of Azure Skies wasn't someone who liked to joke around. He suddenly felt a little uneasy, but it was a little too late. He suddenly heard a voice say, "It means an idiot like you really shouldn't live in this world." The voice had just sounded and it was already in his ears. Be careful. He heard the sound of the knight unsheathing their swords, and could not help but turn around in horror, but it was a little too late. A tail as thick as a bucket stretched out from nowhere, and slammed heavily on him. Gerd screamed and suddenly spat out blood as he was sent flying, and fell across the ice, leaving a conspicuous trail of blood. This is... Veronica and Shido looked at the sudden change in surprise. They could not help but be surprised because what appeared under the sun was an elegant creature with shining scales, a slender neck and a pair of wings covering the body. To be exact, it was a dragon. A golden dragon. Alaz was entrenched on the ice field, looking down at everyone from above. Her huge body was almost the size of a 3-story building, and her slender neck was slightly bent, supporting a head with 4 horns. Platinum scales as smooth as mirrors replaced her clothes, one next to the other, plated with a layer of light purple metallic brilliance, which was a special color that only gradually maturing dragons would have. Alaz lowered her head, the flames in her golden eyes were burning, she looked at everyone present, and everyone was shouting in their hearts, "Martha above, a dragon. We have lived with a dragon for so long." And Gerd, who was struggling to get up from the ground, was even more desperate. Now he finally understood what Veronica's words meant. He felt that he was really an idiot, hopelessly stupid. He wanted to beg for mercy, but a terrible psychological shock had spread in everyone's hearts. For a moment, most of the people present felt as if they had fallen into a boundless, pitch-black world. There was no sense of touch, smell, or even time or direction in this world. The only thing that could be heard was a terrifying scream from the horizon that was approaching from afar, shaking their eardrums. Gerd had just gotten up from the ground, but his legs were weak and he fell to his knees. Only Veronica could hold on a little. She supported Shido with one hand. The scholar's face was pale. Brando and the Shire were completely unaffected, but even so, they saw the reaction of the others and understood what it was. This was the power that dragons were born with. Draconic aura. For your arrogance, I should have gouged out your eyes and eaten your heart, to warn other humble creatures to maintain the necessary respect for dragons. But your luck is pretty good. I really don't want to scratch your dirty maggot-like body, so I'll spare your life this time. You'd better not appear in front of me again, or I can't guarantee that I'll burn you to ashes with a single breath of fire. A majestic voice sounded in everyone's hearts, completely different from Allah's tender and childish voice, as if it was a queen who ruled the world, and only a little of the little female dragon's scent could be vaguely heard. The first sentence of the voice was still on the ground, but by the end of the sentence the dragon had spread her wings and jumped up, hovering in the air, her voice rumbling through the wilderness. All the warhorses knelt to the ground at the same time. Brando, you owe me another one. When the little female dragon said this sentence, her voice had already passed through the clouds. Brando looked up, only to see a shadow passing through the snowfield as if covering the sky. Alaz spread her wings, and a terrifying aura spread far and wide across the entire glacier. That was the aura of a dragon. With a crack, Erek saw a crack appear on the crystal in the hands of his wizard, and in the blink of an eye, it broke into pieces and turned into ashes. In less than 2 weeks, the powerful Grand Duke had completely changed his appearance, and his original energetic image was no longer there. He hid under a fur cloak, and the only impression he left to outsiders was a pale face that was so thin that it was almost inhuman. Erek was so thin that he looked like a skeleton, his face covered with wrinkled skin, and only his eyes were still staring motionlessly at the crystal in the dried-up eye sockets. There was still a trace of life in his eyes. My lord. The wizard turned around and looked at him with a questioning look. This is the draconic aura. That stupid dragon has indeed made its move. Erek grabbed his cane and said with some fanaticism, Let's go. I know that old hag Veronica is following us. Let them follow us. They're just a bunch of idiots. My lord, your body. Shut up. Erek glanced at Devard coldly. Although he was getting thinner by the day, his majesty was more and more obvious, and the aura that grabbed people's breath seemed to be coming out of his body at any time. Devard shuddered and quickly shut his mouth. I'm not those mortals. In order to get power, sacrifice is inevitable. Remember our pursuit, only chaos is the only one and everything else is a burden. Arek replied coldly, the pursuit of emotional weakness, the ignorant grab for money and power, and the vain justice. The mortals pursue these things that are not worth mentioning. How can they defeat us? Let's go. Master defeated them in Babel and it will be the same now. He coughed and then slowly stood up. In the forest, the knight in black robes also stood up. These knights looked very strange. They were far taller than the average person, and looked like the orcs of the Great Plains. But the orcs did not know how to make armor, and their intelligence was only enough for them to use simple weapons. What was more eye-catching was that each knight had an Ouroboros symbol on their cloaks. Freya? Freya? The girl from Bucci was a little distracted. She recalled the scene at that time. Brando stood in the tent and asked her a question seriously. Freya, how will you view war? The last time Brando was so serious was when Braggs told her how to save Bucci. How should she view war? Freya asked herself. She should have hated the war. The war had taken away everything she should have. Her peaceful life, her family, her homeland. Everything she was once familiar with was lost in the raging flames. Looking back at those memories, it seemed that only deep pain was left. But Erwin can only be saved through war, and in this war, you will become the executioner you once hated. Freya, your enemy is not only Madara. You should understand this. You will kill and more people will be sacrificed in the flames of war or lose their homes, lose their families. If you are just a soldier you can ignore it. But I know what your dream is, Freya. Do you know what your goal is? Freya grasped her sword tightly. In a trance she saw blood flowing, and there were only endless corpses on the battlefield. Among these corpses, there was Bessa's pure and innocent face. She looked at her with empty eyes as if she was questioning her. Then she saw the little girl who died in the hands of the demon. Then she saw her family in Bucci. Freya felt that she still lacked an answer in her heart. She closed her eyes and then opened them again. Sound and her 5 senses seemed to have returned to her body, and only then did she realize that Maynard had called her several times. Freya. What's the matter? The future goddess of war turned around. Why are you in a daze? Maynard was a little dissatisfied. I don't know. Freya shook her head blankly. I think I saw a blue shadow and then I don't know what happened. A blue shadow? Maynard reached out and touched her forehead. Are you too tired recently? No? I don't think so. What time is it? She looked up and asked. See for yourself. Maynard handed her the pocket watch. Freya glanced at it, and then looked at the line of Inhal halflings in the distance. Is there any news from Brando? He has confirmed with Medisha that he is the one we are looking for. Then, Miss Alaz is already on her way. I understand. Freya threw the pocket watch into the snow. Brando asked her how she planned to fight to complete this plan. She knew very well that in order to make that old fox fall into the trap, she had to leave no one alive. She pulled out part of the Lionheart sword and pressed the cold blade with her fingertips, feeling a chill in her heart. She was no longer the little girl. She understood what it meant to be a knight and what it meant to be a soldier. Although she did not have a clear answer in her heart, at least she understood that killing could not bring peace, but at least it could solve conflicts. So her answer was simple, only one sentence. I understand, Brando. When she looked at Brendel, there was no hesitation in her eyes, because her last trace of hesitation had already been buried together with Bess and Ampere Seal. She pulled out the entire Lionheart sword and the blade flashed coldly. Everyone saw the temporary commander move and reacted. One by one they stood up. The knight took off their cloaks and threw them to the ground. Then, the noble officers of Cruz's army looked at Freya, waiting for a good show. Freya glanced at the sword in her hand, pointed it down and ordered, Go down the mountain from both sides of the hill, do not enter the enemy's field of vision. Listen to my orders, cut off the retreat of Inhal halflings on the snowfield. Before seeing the signal, no one is allowed to fight. Cruz's army was stunned. The air was like falling snow, silent and sinking. Wait, this is not in line with our orders. Brund immediately questioned, Commander, are you planning to wait? If those halfling cavalry enter the holy cathedral of the Hibernator, it will really attract that damn thief. Commander, please allow me to doubt your motives. I can understand your doubts. Freya glanced at Maynard beside her. She calmed her breathing in her heart and replied, But we are not the main attackers. Not us. Then who could it be? Freya looked up at the sky. Her gaze crossed the crystal-like treetops of the pine forest. The quiet cruise officers noticed her behavior and also raised their heads. The clouds in the sky seemed to have a slight movement. The forest, which was full of all kinds of sounds before, quieted down for a moment, as if an invisible hand was strangling their throats. Then the clouds suddenly gathered together and separated, and a huge shadow roared out from the clouds. Brund stared at the scene with his mouth wide open, and seemed to feel that his throat was making a hissing sound. The crew's knights stood in the forest as if they had grown roots under their feet, like a group of stone statues. Their souls were experiencing a tsunami. This was not an illusion. The draconic aura descended from mid-air, and a terrible scream sounded from everyone's souls. Only Freya had seen such a scene before. On the battlefield of Ampere Seal, dark clouds covered the sun that day, and a ray of gold descended from above the clouds, bringing the final victory of the war. She turned her head. Medisha. Sister Freya, I'm here. The silver fairy princess lifted her cloak and asked loudly, Do you want to summon? Freya turned her head. The halflings on the ice field had already discovered the dragon in the sky. Men and horses panicked together and fell into a ball. Those who were a little smarter had already begun to flee. Freya turned her head again and nodded to Medisha. Knight of Fran, listen to my horn. Medisha intertwined silver threads in her hand, weaving a silver horn. She immediately blew the horn and chanted loudly, The sky-blue flag of the plains of Malald flutters like the sea. The spears of the Fran people gleam coldly. Knight, listen to the long sound of my horn. The ancient spirits are summoning the courage in your hearts. Knight, mount with me and get ready. The voice of the silver elf was melodious like a song from ancient times. The crew's knights heard the spell and looked at each other. They did not know what Medisha was summoning, but Brund was the first to react. Oh my God, this is the Silver King's Knight Legion. As soon as he finished speaking, Medisha had already puffed up her cheeks and blew the horn for the second time. The horn sounded melodiously, and Alaz also swept over the forest at this moment. The wind pressure swept over the canopy and swooped over the distant ice field. But when the knight looked back, they were extremely surprised to see a glowing white light and heavily armored warhorses in the forest. These warhorses that seemed to come from the heavens converged into a silver tide and came to their side in the blink of an eye. A unicorn came to Medisha's side and affectionately rubbed the little princess' cheeks. Medisha touched its long horn and mounted the horse. Freya was the second to mount her horse. Her warhorse was taller than the others, and its hooves were burning with silver flames. This was the legendary mount of the Silver King, the Holy Spirit. Everyone get on your horses. Freya ordered. Remember your task. She looked back at the planes and sighed slightly. They have messaging crystals on them. Don't give them any chance. Don't leave any prisoners. Kill everyone. When this order was given, Maynard looked back at the girl from the countryside of Butchie. Freya frowned, but her eyes were still firm. Kuwu used to be Erek's most trusted confidant. The halfling with his small head and large ears knew very well how he earned Erek's trust. It was not because of his outstanding abilities, but because of his loyalty. His father, an equally proud halfling, also served the previous Duke Erek. Their family had such a tradition of loyalty, and this was what Kuwu was most proud of. But this time he knew that he could get through the previous difficulties, but this time it might be his last time on the battlefield. He tightened his bearskin robe, still thinking about the task given to him by the Duke, to challenge a dragon. Warriors were supposed to die on the battlefield, and this was a rare honor for Kuwu. The Anhor people were the most tenacious people in the highlands, and they were the most valiant warriors. Today they challenged a dragon, and their courage would be engraved on the stone pedestals of their hometown. But the cold wind was so cold that it almost lifted their robes. The cold cut their bodies like knives, and these halflings who were used to the dry and cold climate of the highlands could not bear it. Kuwu had a bad premonition since this morning. The elders of his family often said that if the day did not start well, then everything would not go well. He broke his own water bottle in the morning, which was an extremely unsettling bad omen. The team moved forward with difficulty on the ice field, and for the whole morning, they had not traveled more than a few miles. Kuwu frowned. He was the most experienced warrior in his family, and he had been listening to the sound transmitted by the wind. Suddenly he heard a strange sound. It was like thunder passing through the clouds, but it was not so obvious, but it was still rumbling. This low-frequency rumbling soon became clear. Kuwu turned his head and stared at the sky with some fanaticism. He finally recognized that this was the sound of something flying in the sky, and it must be a huge monster. If they really attracted the dragon, then they would die here and their blood would be honorable. In just a moment, The huge shadow that they were looking forward to appeared on the horizon. It split the clouds, tore the sky, and jumped into Kuwa's field of vision in an instant. At that moment, all the Onhor halflings discovered the enemy and screamed. Among them, the timid ones were already scared out of their wits and began to flee in panic. But Kuwa could forgive them. After all, when he first heard about this task, he was also stunned like them. He remembered how he was at that time and felt a little embarrassed. How could he be considered a qualified warrior? He took out Gao Yuan's strong liquor from his bosom, tilted his head back and poured it down his throat. There was a burning sensation, and then he wiped his mouth and revealed a fanatical smile. It was enough. He never expected his men to deal with a dragon. That was an impossible task. But at least they had completed their mission, and that was enough. That stupid dragon had been attracted to the ice field, so Sir Lord's plan could be realized. Ku Wu almost laughed out loud, but before he could laugh out loud, a trace of haze flashed across his mind. He saw the dragon's shining golden scales. It was a gold dragon. This is impossible. Kuwa's eyes widened and his face became pale. His big ears almost stood up. It was another dragon. There were 2 dragons in this ice field. No, he could not help but look around in panic. He still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. He hoped that Duke Arek's information was wrong. Perhaps it was a gold dragon that lived here and not a frost dragon. Although this idea was very disrespectful, the halfling leader did not care so much at this moment. On the horse, an even stranger sound shattered all his delusions. It was a sound that was even more distant than a dragon's scream. It sounded as if it came from the horizon, and it lasted for a long time. In Kuwa's life he had only heard such a sound once. That was when he went to the holy war with Arek, and the Fanzan Legion's horn sounded. It's an ambush. Kuwa immediately understood what had happened. They had been set up. He trembled and took out the communication crystal, but it did not respond. No, it's a law barrier. He was almost moaning. The enemy was obviously well prepared. He immediately grabbed his weapon and screamed, "Quick, run out of this area. Spread out and spread the message." He looked up, and his green pupils reflected the gold dragon's figure that was getting bigger and bigger. The shadow seemed to represent despair. A golden flame fell from the sky. P.S. 9K chapters. I won't divide them into chapters. I've been busy these 2 days and I only have time to update at night. I think I'll be free tomorrow, and I'll continue to answer questions in the book review section. I'll also solve the previous problem. Also, I'm begging for monthly votes. I haven't begged for monthly votes in a long time. Begging for votes. Everyone, please support me with votes and give me some motivation. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 759. At the moment of the dragon's roar, the mountains shook. The Myrna said that the shadow of the dragon swept across the plains, and the wind brought by the wings would blow for a day and a night. Alaz spread her wings and was still a few miles away, but the wind was already raging through the forest. The triangular flags on the tips of the halflings' spears on the ice field whistled in the wind, but the darkness that gripped their hearts was endless fear. Dragon! Someone screamed, and the neat teams scattered in all directions on the snowfield. Kuwu saw that he could no longer control the team, and had to escape to the northwest with his night bodyguard. In the blink of an eye, Alaz had already flown over these tiny creatures. She lowered her head, and her huge shadow shrouded the team of hundreds of people. Her golden eyes reflected the scattered halflings. Based on her interest, she first chose the small team in the south. About 20 or 30 halflings rode ponies and were fleeing to the crystal forest on the hillside, but Alaz would not give them the chance. She lowered her head and spat out a mouthful of golden flames. A large fireball fell from the sky and landed on the glacier, instantly engulfing the halflings who were still running away and turning them into ashes. The flames continued to burn on the ice, and even the ice was sizzling as it melted layer by layer, revealing the black igneous rocks below. These rocks that had melted thousands of years ago were once again turned into lava in the flames, and white steam rose up to tens of meters in the air. The scorching flames seemed to have plucked at the little female dragon's excited heartstrings. She let out a scream, flapped her wings and pulled up high. The flames from her mouth were like a golden sword plowing through the glacier, burning all the way into the forest, turning the ice forest into a blazing pillar of fire. But it was not over yet. Her golden eyes locked onto another team, but this time she did not intend to continue spitting fire. Even a dragon could not spit fire endlessly. That was just the delusion of mortals and fairy tales about dragons. Alaz rose high like an arrowhead, and then swooped down on the team of halflings. She swept over their heads, and the strong wind she brought was like a sharp blade, blowing the halflings to pieces. Some of the knights were even pulled off their horses by the huge wind pressure, hitting the hard ice and rolling for tens of meters before stopping. Their brains were already splattered. Alaz looked at these unlucky fellows and felt even more pleased with herself, as if she had vented all her anger. She let out a crisp giggle in the air, but it sounded like a deafening muffled thunder to the ears of others. The little female dragon circled in midair and landed heavily on the glacier. She stretched out her sharp claws and grabbed the ice to stabilize her body. The huge impact caused her to tear ice shards out of the ice, leaving behind more than 10 deep claw marks that were tens of meters long. Alaz turned around and swept the halfling cavalry at the forefront away with a sweep of her tail. She turned around and stood in front of these little things, and stretched out her claws to slap away a rider who could not stop in time. Her sharp claws were like 4 of the sharpest steel swords made by the dwarves. With a light slash, the knight's stomach was split open. Then she lowered her head and swallowed the little thing and the horse in one bite. Dragons were not the embodiment of justice in any legends. The Inhal halflings who belonged to Erek seemed to have finally realized that there was no hope of escaping, so they angrily picked up their spears and attacked. Although they were as weak as children in front of the dragon, these halflings were not good men and women. They were first and foremost Erek's private soldiers, veterans who had been on the battlefield and killed people. Both soldiers and civilians had died in their hands. Once on the battlefield, they were all desperados who did not care about their lives. It was just that even undead followers might not have the courage to fight against a WIRM. Alaz looked at these tiny creatures and could not help but yawn. She casually broke a few spears that were thrown at her, then raised her claws and slapped the halfling cavalry into meat paste one by one, as if she was playing whack-a-mole. When she slapped the 7th one, the halfling finally broke down, crying and running away. When Kuwu turned around, he happened to see such a scene. Those were his clansmen. His heart ached, but he knew that those people would not be able to escape. The dragon was just a cat playing with mice. The wind whistled in his ears, he held the reins tightly, his body crouched on the horse's back. The surrounding scenery quickly receded from both sides, but he did not intend to retreat into the forest, but had been retreating north along the snowfield. The previous 2 teams were first targeted by the terrible dragon because they were in a hurry to retreat into the forest. Dragons were very shrewd creatures, but most mortals only remembered their barbaric side. But Kuwu knew this very well, so he led his night guard to escape this disaster. He did not expect to survive this battle, but Kuwu knew very well that at least before he died, he must first find the holy cathedral of the hibernator, or at least seal the young frost dragon. This was the last thing he could do for Grand Duke Erek. But things were not that simple. The big-eared halfling turned his head, and a silver light flashed on the horizon. The valiant girl on horseback was commanding hundreds of knights to chase along the glacier. The Valkyrie was wearing Erwin's knight armor, and 2 cloaks fluttered behind her like wings. Behind her, after experiencing the 2 incidents of the dragon and the Valkyrie, Cruz's knights finally reluctantly accepted the fact that the girl had become their temporary commander. This had nothing to do with Freya's leadership ability, but strength on the battlefield could indeed determine a lot of things. Soldiers advocated force, and it was an immutable truth that only the strong could be the boss. The knights of the Folded Sword Knight Regiment rode on their gleaming war horses, sweeping across the ice field like a rolling snow wave. Unlike the halflings' ponies, these Valkyries' hooves did not sink into the snow at all. It was as if they were flying on the surface of the snow, and their speed was incredible. Freya divided the knights into echelons, forming a diagonal line from left to right. She commanded them to rush down the mountain forest, then advance north along the west side of the snowfield, and soon caught up with the first fleeing halfling cavalry. Luoji. Everyone else, keep going, don't slow down. The girl shouted, and her voice spread far and wide through the strength of a silver rank, echoing on the battlefield. The name Freya shouted was the name of the female knight with a somewhat thin face. This name made Luoji frown. The female knight even raised her head and looked ahead, but did not answer. She felt a little awkward being commanded by Erwin's people, but as a soldier's nature of obedience, she still drew her sword and shouted, "10th echelon, prepare to attack." The knights behind her responded in unison, and the sound of swords being drawn rang out for a moment. The Kurletzian knights raised their long swords high, and the bright blade refracted a continuous undulating line of flashing light on the snowfield. Looking down from the sky above the snowy plains, a slanted black line was moving forward rapidly. It swallowed up a scattered group of fleeing soldiers and swallowed them into the left wing. The 10th echelon composed of Cruz's knights slowed down, but the other 9 echelons continued to move forward. Freya leaned on the back of her horse and looked back nervously, but she was satisfied with what was happening. The knights of the Folded Sword Knight Regiment had high tactical literacy and almost perfectly executed her tactics. Freya seemed to finally be relieved. She raised her head, and at this moment, the demeanor of the future Valkyrie seemed to finally radiate from this girl from the countryside of Bucci. Her eyes were shining and she drew her sword and pointed to the front. She firmly ordered, "The 3rd, 4th and 5th echelons, break away to the east. The 2nd, 6th and 7th echelons attack freely. The 8th and 9th echelons take care of the rear. The rest of you follow me." Under Freya's command, the battlefield immediately changed. Cruz's knight regiment suddenly scattered like a pack of wolves, rushing towards their respective targets, faintly forming an encirclement. Although the enemy they had to encircle was several times more than them, there was a giant dragon chasing after these halflings. No one had a trace of fear in their hearts. What's more, they were the proud elites of Cruz. How could they bow down to Erwin's country bumpkins? Even if Alaz was not on the field, they could still proudly launch a charge against these halfling cavalry. Freya's tactics were almost immediately effective. The halflings under Arek's command were finally in trouble. These Cruz's knight regiment were much more purposeful than Alaz, who was more playful. They carried out the wolf pack tactics like groups of winter wolves driving their prey forward and constantly killing those who fell behind. If a halfling cavalry tried to rush out of this net, the 8th and 9th echelon Cruz's knight regiment behind them would immediately kill all their hopes. The battlefield was littered with corpses. Some halflings saw that there was no hope of escaping and had to turn around and launch a desperate charge. They were all fierce mountain people, but unfortunately, their opponents were also the best of Cruz's academies. Even if their combat experience was slightly lacking, the average strength of a lower gold was enough to make up for any gap. Almost all of the Cruz's knight regiment had some success. From the 2nd echelon to the 10th echelon, they soon fell into a chaotic battle, but only Freya was still moving forward. She locked onto the team that fled far away at the front. She did not know that it was Kuwu and his knight regiment, but she was very clear that the other party must be an excellent commander. Freya had been paying attention to this team almost from the beginning. From the moment Alaz entered the battlefield until now, the commander's choice was almost always the best. The other party did not make a single mistake. Kuwu was fleeing north along the border of the glacier. The pony horse fully utilized its advantage in such a terrain. Wild ponies lived in the cold highlands and often had to pass through the ice gaps between the valleys to go farther to forage for food. Finding cracks in the glacier seemed to have become an instinct in their bones. On the other hand, Freya's valiant warhorse could float on the ice and move forward, but after all, it could not really fly. Sometimes a crack in the ice would kill everyone, so the future Valkyrie had to be cautious. The two sides chased and fled, and in the blink of an eye, a distance of 1 or 2 miles flashed by. Undulating ridges appeared on the ice field. Freya frowned and was a little anxious. If they moved forward, they would rush out of the interference zone that prohibited communication magic. However, she was anxious and uneasy. Kuwu was also not having a good time. In his view, the horses of the guys behind him did not seem to need physical strength, and the mounts of his and his knight regiments were already overwhelmed. The winner must be decided in a short period of time. This thought flashed through their minds almost at the same time. Freya gritted her teeth and tightened her grip on the reins, but Brund, who was beside her, could no longer hold back. Although, in all seriousness, he no longer had any prejudice against this commander, and it was difficult to talk about commanding in such a battle, but Freya had maintained the necessary decisiveness of a commander from beginning to end, and had not made any mistakes so far, which showed that she was at least calm enough and knew how to analyze, which were at least essential elements of a good commander. But like Freya, Brund also realized that if they continued to chase, their mission would probably fail. "We have to find a way to drive them to a dead end," he shouted intermittently against the wind. Freya was slightly startled and then nodded. This was actually her own idea, but the terrain of the ice field was changeable, and how to choose the right one was a problem. "Little Pero, we should go that way." Brund turned back and shouted to someone beside him. Freya knew the young man, a top student who graduated from St. Eberson. This thin young man may not be suitable to be a soldier, but it was said that this person's graduation grades were high enough to make all the people who graduated with him jealous. Freya was also an academic herself, and knew very well what this meant. But little Pero shook his head. The terrain of the snowfield is too complicated and luck plays a big part. If you want me to tell the truth, I can only say that I can't tell. We can only bet on luck and see if Lady Martha favors us. He said so in the wind and shrugged. Everyone's heart sank, but they also knew that this was not an excuse. Knight Maynard, Brun turned his head to the other side again. He knew that this knight was by Princess Erwin's side. Compared to Freya, Maynard was already famous as the best graduate of the first class of the Royal Knight Academy. What do you think? But Maynard's expression did not change. She did not even turn her head, standing straight in the wind and snow like a javelin, and just replied faintly, "Listen to the commander." Brun choked. But everyone's eyes had already fallen on Freya. The girl from the countryside of Bucci was slightly stunned, and subconsciously tightened her grip on the reins. She bit her lip, but did not say anything to refuse. She raised her head and glanced to the northeast. P.S. That's it for today. I'll go to the book review section to answer questions later. I'm so tired. I'll just roll around and beg for monthly votes. Tomorrow your daily 10,000 strong baboons will be back. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for recommendation and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 760. Knight Brun, do you see that crack in the west? Lead the 8th echelon around from the back and surround the cavalry from the side. Freya suddenly turned her head and looked at the broken glacier in the west, and said to Brun beside her. The broken glacier undulated through the entire snowfield, refracting the sun after noon and sparkling under the ice. Brun looked in that direction, somewhat puzzled. Why, it's impossible to catch up from that direction. Yes, Knight Brun, your task is to force them to change direction and let the halflings flee north, preferably northeast. Freya replied. What's in the east? Brun was stunned and subconsciously looked in that direction, but in his field of vision, the east and the north were the same endless glaciers. The edge of the glacier shone under the clear sky, like the edge of a mirror, piercing his eyes. He could not help but squint his eyes, somewhat suspicious. Brun, it's the wind. Little Pero, riding on the horse, seemed to react. The wind is blowing from the northwest. No one present was a fool, and Brun immediately understood. He looked at the ice dust raised by the wind slowly moving in their direction on the glacier, and could not help but marvel in his heart. The wind was blowing from the northwest, which meant that there might be a mountain pass in that direction, and the north and east were most likely in the direction of the colonel. These things were not learned in the nobles' tactical classes and could only be regarded as common sense, but not everyone could acutely perceive and use this to make judgments at this time. The guy in front may have been aware of this early on. I don't think the other commander chose to flee in this direction to leave his fate to Lady Martha, little Pero further analyzed. He looked at Freya with some admiration and said intermittently in the wind, "We've blocked his retreat, the other party will not sit still. Lady Freya, you want to force them to turn back and fight us to the death, don't you?" The girl was slightly startled. She did not think that far ahead, but she had a faint intuition that the other party might turn back if she did so. But as a commander, she had at least learned how to maintain her dignity and nodded gently. "I understand." Brun nodded excitedly. No one was willing to listen to the command of a good-for-nothing, especially for them. Mediocrity was unbearable, but at the thought of ushering in a perfect victory soon, these young people from Cruz could not help but get excited. Seriously speaking, this was their first battle. On the entire glacier, Cruz's knight and Alaz formed a perfect suppression of the halflings. Arek's Enhor cavalry had almost no room for resistance and were strangled on the ice. Blood flowed from the corpses of the halfling cavalry and instantly froze into a pool of red ice. The 10th echelon led by Luoji and the other 7 echelons were in the final battle, and on the final battlefield the battle was about to come to an end. Kuwu saw a cavalry with a swallow-tailed flag separating from the pursuers behind and entering the shadow of the broken glacier. He understood the opponent's commander's plan. He was actually waiting for this opportunity. There were 34 night guards around him, all of whom were good lads among the Enhor people. They were the most elite soldiers in Grand Duke Arek's halfling cavalry, and the opponent's cavalry echelon only had a dozen people. He did not believe that 4 times the number was not enough to defeat these unknown cavalry. The halfling knight could not help but sneer when he saw that the enemy commander still dared to divide her forces. In his opinion, Freya had made the right choice, but in a sense, it was also a mistake. The enemy was too arrogant, or rather, their frantic escape at the beginning had successfully created an illusion, causing the enemy to think that they were weak and could be bullied. Kuwu was very satisfied with the situation he had created, but he was not in a hurry to order his men to turn around. These halfling knight guards who were willing to fight side by side with him and did not scatter were all his most trusted subordinates. Good steel should be used on the blade. Kuwu was waiting for Brun's cavalry to be far enough away from Freya. He cunningly pretended to continue to flee, and as Freya wished, he readjusted his direction to the north. It seemed that the crew's knight was fooled. He saw Brun's cavalry bypassing the broken glacier and finally understood that he had been waiting for a golden opportunity. In fact, he knew very well that at this moment, the halfling cavalry's ponies were almost reaching their physical limits, and could only support one more charge at most, but that was enough. Kuwu whistled, and the halfling cavalry accompanying him turned a corner on the ice field, facing Freya and her first echelon. "They're here." Seeing the scene in front of him, little Perro's voice rang out. Freya saw the halfling cavalry turn their horses around and could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. The opponent only needed to run a short distance forward to reach the limit of the interference magic, but fortunately, it seemed that Lady Martha was still on their side. She raised her long sword high, prepare for battle. The knight let out a restless cry and raised the shields in their hands. The halfling cavalry was one of Woan's most unique cavalry. They were not heavy cavalry who were good at charging formations. These cavalry who rode ponies and even war dogs were best at close to mid-range combat. To be precise, they were cavalry who threw spears. The two sides launched a deadly charge on the ice field, and the distance gradually shortened to the point where they could see each other's tense faces, human and halfling. Kuwu's cavalry suddenly whistled and threw the short spears in their hands forward. A rain of short spears flew over tens of meters in a flash and poured into the thin line of Cruz's knight. However, the expected scene of people being thrown off their horses did not appear. The shields in the hands of the human knights suddenly unfurled one after another, and when the short spears collided with those light shields, they were immediately broken into two pieces and wood chips flew everywhere. Kuwu's heart went cold when he saw this scene. He did not make a mistake, but as the head of a noble's private army, he probably never dreamed that there was such a big gap between the inferior cavalry under his command and the most elite knight of the powerful empire on the continent. This kind of ignorance sometimes had to be compensated with one's life. After a round of spear throwing, Cruz's men were unharmed. On the flat snowfield, when the two cavalry charged at each other, there was no second chance. Probably seeing the end, the morale of the elite knight of Enholm plummeted, but the accumulated pride of the past made them bite the bullet and raise their weapons. Looking from above, the Cruz knight led by Freya looked like a thin silver blade, piercing the heart of the halfling cavalry. "They're dead meat." Brun saw this scene and pulled the reins to stop. The battle had just begun, but he could already see the result. The blonde knight said with some regret, "It's a pity that we can't participate in the battle in person. Don't worry, Erek isn't dead yet. If we clean up the battlefield quickly we might still have a chance." A knight behind him shouted excitedly. The Flame King once said that cavalry was an indomitable force. Hot blood and fanaticism were their symbols. Just being on the battlefield in person was enough to make these young people restless. "Ah, well said." The knights were talking, but Brun turned his head. He seemed to see a flash of light on the horizon. He rubbed his eyes and almost thought he was hallucinating. The sun on the ice often causes snow blindness, and sometimes it is not impossible for the refracted light to cause hallucinations. But Brun felt a little uneasy. He turned to the others and said, "Did you see anything?" "What?" "It's in that direction. Didn't you see it? It looks like a blue light." Brun asked with some doubts. "Blue light? No. Could it be that you're mistaken, Brun?" Brun shrugged. "Probably." But as soon as his voice fell, someone in the team screamed, "Oh my God, look over there." Brun was slightly startled and immediately turned his head vigilantly. But the moment he turned his head, his face changed instantly. "Martha above, what the hell is this?" The silent cave was covered in ice and snow. The ice that had not melted for thousands of years formed a blue wall. The glaciers sank down, forming lines. In the dark cave, the naturally formed holes crisscrossed. However, in this uncanny workmanship of nature, there were many man-made objects piled up. If you looked carefully you would find many boxes of goods from Cruz. The eagle emblem on them indicated that these boxes were once military supplies. On the other side there were many wooden barrels piled up. These barrels came from Fort Valenden, Lanton Island, and even further away. These barrels and wooden boxes were filled with all kinds of food. If anyone came here, they would think that they had mistakenly entered the underground storage room of a frost giant. But this was a bona fide dragon's lair. Although here you could not see glittering gold coins, jewelry, priceless artwork, gold and silver utensils, or even the dazzling gemstones that dragons loved the most. There was only food. Pickled beef, sausages, frozen fish, yogurt, bread, fruit, and jars of honey and candy piled up together. But this cave that looked like a witch's candy house was indeed the hiding place of Sheeta the frost dragon whelp. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Cheetian.com to vote for recommendation and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 761. Now at this moment, a meatball was running around among the food. If you looked closely, you would find that it was moving the goods one by one to a deeper part of the cave. The meatball had a pair of wings. Although the wings reminded people of the roast turkey at the New Year's festival, it had a pair of fat claws. The claws were short and small, but they could still grab the boxes and drag them back. Its thick and sturdy hind legs were obviously overdeveloped. It swayed as it walked as if it couldn't move if it didn't do so. Every time the meatball took a step back, its tail, which was as thick as a water bucket, swayed and made a puffing sound. If it were not for the dense and beautiful pale scales on its body and the two pairs of horns that proved its identity, most people would think that it was a hippopotamus instead of a dragon. Even though Sheeta was a real dragon, a frost dragon whelp that was very rare even among the dragon race, he was driven back by the dragon race when he was young. Because as a dragon, he did not store his wealth but was passionate about collecting food. Sheeta's parents thought that it was a shame, and then kicked him out on the first day he could be independent. In fact, it was this experience that created Sheeta's timid character. However, he was satisfied with his character and his current life. The humans always gave him a lot of delicious food, and this place was very comfortable to live in. Of course, there was one thing. Sheeta was still a dragon after all. He felt that the humans thought that he did not notice them, which was an insult to his intelligence. In fact, whether it was for Veronica or Erek, Sheeta had already noticed these humans from the moment they entered the glacier. If a person's intelligence was directly proportional to the capacity of their brain, then Sheeta's intelligence was probably hidden in his fat body. Sheeta rested his chin on his claws and thought for a while. He seemed to remember that he still had work to do. He had been preparing to move since 2 weeks ago. The humans seemed to be up to no good, and Sheeta had never bothered to fight with these lowly creatures. Although the dragons probably thought that he was a timid dragon and the shame of the dragon race, Sheeta did not think so. Why fight? There was no benefit in fighting. Fighting would consume calories, and it was not easy for him to collect so many delicious things and raise himself to be white and fat. It was not worthwhile to find trouble with those poor country bumpkin adventurers. There was an old saying in Nine Phoenix, and Sheeta had always regarded it as his motto: those who have nothing to lose are not afraid of those who wear shoes. And now he just felt that he was the one who was wearing shoes. How could he be confused with those beggars? All in all, our Frost WRM whelps spent about 2 weeks to move all the items that could have been moved in 2 days. In the meantime, they even used magic to make up for the time they wasted when they suddenly fell asleep. Sheeta's magic was also unique. He called it the magic of wisdom. Its specific principles were: don't use troublesome spells, don't use spells that were too long, don't use spells that required movements, and don't use spells that were too tiring. The rest were Lord Sheeta's exclusive spells. After the cave was emptied, it became spacious except for one place. In the center of the cave, there was a column of frost standing between the blue ground and the cave ceiling. This column did not look like an ice prism that was frozen by water. From afar it looked more like a trapezoidal ice wall, and on the front of the wall there was a sun inlaid. To be precise, it was an object that constantly emitted light and heat to the outside world. 4 silver rings surrounded this ball of light and slowly rotated in 4 directions. And further away from the ball of light, there were some small, mercury-like spheres that were also rotating in the same orbit. If one counted carefully, there were a total of 36 groups of mercury-like spheres of different sizes surrounding the ball of light. This was eternal energy. The witches gave it a name, Dragon's Heart. According to legend, it was a divine object that Dragon King Bahamut brought out from ancient ruins. There were a total of 12 such dragon's hearts in Wonde, but 3 of them were destroyed in the flames of war. The remaining 6 were still in the hands of the dragons, and the remaining 3 were missing. The one in front of them was obviously one of the 3 missing dragons' hearts. Sheeta looked at this thing and hesitated for a moment. Then he wriggled his meatball-like body up the column, grabbed the silver rings and removed this thing from the icicle. Then he looked at the empty groove left on the icicle. After thinking for a moment, he took out a gray gem the size of a wash basin and inlaid it in. It had to be said that the size was just right. Only then did the meat dragon nod in satisfaction. Holding the dragon's heart, he quickly hid in the depths of the cave. "My lord, this is the place." The magus looked at the narrow crack between two glaciers not far away. He turned around and respectfully bowed to Grand Duke Erek, replying respectfully. Erek's body was bent over at this moment. It seemed that even the deerskin coat was too heavy for him to straighten up. He looked like an old man with one foot in the grave. But when he stood in front of everyone, his aura alone was enough to make them not even dare to breathe loudly. He looked at the crack. The crack was slanted under a layer of ice that was hundreds of meters thick. Inside the crack was a sea of blue. As he continued to look forward, his vision was covered by shadows. Before Erek opened his mouth, his followers had already lit torches. Although the world of Wond had widely used magic for illumination, in most unknown areas, magic was actually an unstable existence. It could be noticed by some unknown existence, and it could also cause some trouble that you didn't want to see, especially in the Black Forest. The fire quickly lit up the cave. The narrow and long crack seemed to extend into the depths of hell. Erek naturally wouldn't take the risk himself. He first sent a team of knights in. The situation inside seemed to be better than expected. The knights sent in quickly turned back and reported that everything was safe. The dragon really left. "My lord is wise." The accompanying wizard immediately replied flatteringly. "Dragons are very arrogant. Generally, they wouldn't set any traps in their lairs. Since that's the case, why don't we immediately go in and find the dragon's heart, my lord?" "What about the two hunters?" Devard suddenly asked. Erek turned around and glanced at him. He was a little impatient. Ever since the Battle of Ampere Seal, this guy lost to the young man. He seemed to have suffered a great setback. Even his ability to do things had greatly decreased. This made Erek very dissatisfied. Devard shivered and immediately understood Erek's meaning. He turned around with a gloomy face and gestured to the knight behind him. "Kill them." When the hunter girl hiding in the ice field saw this scene, she almost immediately wanted to rush up, but her hands sank into the snow and she forced herself to hold back. Brando turned back and looked at the girl's cold red knuckles. He couldn't help but ask comfortingly, "Is your brother in there?" Peya froze and slowly shook her head. "Even if he is in there, we can't save him. Do you see those knight?" Brando pointed to the black knight guarding the periphery of the cave. He couldn't help but squint his eyes. Those should be the Order of the Dead Knight Regiment of All for One. Erek's position in this organization is not low. "Brando, do you know something?" Veronica lay on the other side, frowning as she stared at the Black Knight. However, unlike Brando, she couldn't help but feel a little scared. She found that each of the Black Knight had a faint fluctuation of elemental power, which meant that these knights were at least at the peak of gold and elemental awakening level. But the key was that she knew that this was actually a conservative estimate, because she found that many of the knights had already shown signs of elemental awakening. She narrowed her eyes. It was difficult to hide the lines of law of those who had just entered the elemental awakening stage. There were hundreds of Black Knights. Veronica realized that she had never heard of the origins of these Black Knights before. In fact, she suddenly realized that even All for One itself seemed to have no clear understanding of the world. The four holy cathedrals all thought that All for One was a cult, but it was hard to say how much the world, including the ordinary nobles, knew about the inside of this organization. Brando heard Veronica's question and smiled slightly. "It's normal that you don't know, Lady Veronica. We often hear about the cultists and the world hates them, but when it comes to understanding, it's unknown how many people really know about them. After all, the ban of the Holy Cathedral of Fire is there, and who dares to go deep into understanding these cultists without permission? Even the nobles of Cruz, I'm afraid it's similar." "From what you've said, you seem to know them very well, little guy." Veronica turned back and asked with some interest. "Naturally, the wizards know more. The four most famous branches of the cultists are Silver Heavenly Snake, Sheephead Cult, All for One, and Tree Herders. Among them, the Sheephead Cult is the devil's henchman, exuding the stench of sulfur from head to toe. They help the devil do evil, but it's actually not worth mentioning. Silver Heavenly Snake believes in their agnosticism, believing that the exploration of knowledge and order by mortals violates the mysterious majesty of the world itself. They mainly target wizards and have nothing to do with the average person. The main enemies of the four holy cathedrals are, in fact, All for One and Tree Herders." At this point, Brando paused for a moment before continuing, "But there's actually a big difference between the two. Tree Herders. The Tree Herders are said to have once belonged to the Sky Ring of the Druids. After the fall of Babel Fortress, one of the Withered Ones broke away from the original Druids. This tribe later followed the Dark Dragon and became the terrifying Tree Herders Legion, which is how they got their name. Tree herders. Veronica muttered to herself. Brando nodded, but the dark dragon was defeated by the 4 sages, and the tree herders also fled in all directions, their whereabouts unknown. When they appeared again they were already as crazy as they are now. But unlike All for One, who is enthusiastic about subverting the order of civilization, the tree herders have always been obsessed with stealing the bloodline of God. Stealing the bloodline of God? Miss Scholar finally couldn't help but ask when she heard this. Brando looked back at Scarlet. This mountain girl was once a victim of the tree herders, and he himself suffered greatly. But even he didn't know the root of the tree herders' madness. This was also an unsolved mystery that players had been searching for. He shook his head and said, "No one knows the answer to this question, and it's not what we want to talk about now. What we want to know is the current enemy, All for One." He interrupted Shido and continued, "The tree herders is just a loose organization. Although there are 12 patriarchs, they are actually independent. The disciples of the Black Flames who rely on them are a typical example. As everyone knows, the disciples of the Black Flames split from the former Sheephead cult, but All for One is completely different. This is an unprecedentedly strict organization. As far as I know, they lurk in any civilized country in Wonde, plotting every conspiracy to overthrow the regime, create chaos and war. It's not an exaggeration to say that half or even more of the wars and conspiracies in Wonde have the shadow of All for One behind them. But it's such a huge organization that's inextricably linked to the nobles, but it's like an invisible monster. Everyone knows about it, but no one knows what it is." Brando frowned. In his previous life he had worked hard to find the organization behind All for One, but it was in vain. He finally came to Grecius, the country of the Knight Regiment, and found that All for One's network and claws were all over the world, as if there was no end to it. "All countries?" Shido seemed to be shocked by this sentence. But Brando hesitated and replied, "There may be an exception." "Where?" Veronica looked back at him. She hoped it was Cruz, but she also knew that it was unlikely. The Holy Cathedral of Fire was seriously infiltrated by All for One, not to mention the Empire itself. This was a helpless fact, not to mention that most of the nobles also thought that All for One was a relatively moderate cult. All for One preached all things as one, and this doctrine in fact confused many people. Only Brando knew that this one was actually not the truth itself, but the dusk. "Eloranta." Brando replied, "The only country where sages still exist." Shido couldn't help but cry out. Eloranta was the only country that was completely neutral and did not participate in the affairs of the mainland. The Holy Cathedral of Nature was also distant from the other 3 holy cathedrals, and rarely took the initiative in the Holy War. This country was a mystery to most people in Wonde. "I should have thought of it," she murmured. "You've said so much, but you still haven't talked about the origins of these Knight, Brando?" Veronica asked. "I was just about to say that rice has to be eaten one bite at a time, right?" Brando smiled slightly. He looked at the Black Knight. "P.S. Woo-woo, it seems that your daily 10,000-strong baboons won't be back for the time being. I wrote 7K words today. == no slapping in the face. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 763. The structure of All for One is composed of a Senate, a Privy Council and a Secondary Council. The members of the Secondary Council are called councillors. Many of these councillors are inextricably linked to the nobles of various countries, and some are even nobles themselves such as Erek, Duke Cypher and Marquis Yoakum. There are countless lower-ranking members of All for One, but most of the councillors are not actually closely linked to All for One. They gain more benefits from All for One and pay less in return. This is actually a means of All for One to win over people's hearts. They have some evil black magic, unknown channels of information, the placement of aids, and the circulation of some unseen stolen goods. For example, they are behind the banned slave trade in Cruz, Saint Tassol, and Erewhon. Although these illegal activities have long been banned by law, regrettably they are quite popular among the nobles, and thus have become a breeding ground for evil. The cultists use such means to lure you and our filthy nobles into depravity, and use this as a link to slowly corrupt them. A few nobles will become core members, and I think Erek is one of them. Shido was a little sad when she heard this. This was not the aristocratic circle she had imagined. It was hard for her to imagine that there might be a cultist lurking among her friends. She could not help but frown and ask, "Mr. Brando, is what you said true?" "How could—" "Shido, you are inexperienced, so you don't know how sinister this world is. Most of what Brando said is true. The nobles of the Empire sigh. Veronica sighed. Brando silently waited for the two of them to finish. He knew that Veronica had reason to sigh, because she was also a member of the aristocracy. Naturally, she felt sorry for the overall decay and depravity of this class. However, he was not. Everyone thought that he was the son of the Holy Sword Darius and had inherited the glory of the Highland Knight, but only Brando himself knew that there was a more noble and arrogant soul residing in his heart. Then he continued, "The Privy Council is composed of the President of the Privy Council and 113 members of the Privy Council. These people will wear the silver ring of the ringed serpent and address each other respectfully as Your Excellency. They fight for a common goal, which is to return the world to the rule of the Twilight Dragon. There are generally two requirements to become a member of the Privy Council. First, you must have a fanatical and wise belief in the doctrine of all for one. Second, your own strength must have reached above the elemental activation level. Amon, who we killed last time, should be a member of the Privy Council. I found this in his dimensional hole." Brando took out a shiny silver ring, on which two serpents were circling, biting each other's tails. Veronica snorted softly, somewhat disdainful. The All for One Society had 113 elemental activation members, but the Holy Cathedral of Fire had more than that. Even the Flame Family Knight far exceeded that number. The core strength of All for One Society was nothing more than that in her eyes. Brando felt her emotions, but he did not immediately remind her. Instead, he continued, "As for the Council of Elders and the Chairman of the Privy Council, no one has seen the identities of these people. Even the number of elders in total is not clear. Their existence is only mentioned in some fragmentary information. But I think that the identities of these people should be no less than the 12 patriarchs of the tree herders, and their strength should be similar." Veronica nodded, indicating that she agreed with this guess. But she raised her head, and two sharp gazes shot out from her emerald green eyes. These two gazes fell on Brando's face. This information was also obtained from the Black Tower wizards. "No, this is the investigation of the Shire when he was alive." Brando smiled slightly and replied confidently. Veronica glanced at him. She had already known Brando's identity from the news sent back by the Holy Cathedral, and naturally knew the identity of the Shire. She knew that the Shire had investigated All for One Society for a long time before he disappeared. Even the nobles who knew about it thought that the genius Highland wizard had died at the hands of All for One Society. These were all mistakes of the past, and the Holy Cathedral of Fire also played a dishonorable role in it. The female commander may have doubts in her heart, but she did not want to be entangled in this topic. Generally speaking, the Council of Elders rarely intervenes in the affairs of All for One Society in the secular world. Of course, we don't know much about the actual power they have. However, the secular forces of All for One Society are indeed in the hands of the chairman of the Privy Council. Two of them are the most famous. One is the Order of Chaos, and the other is the black-armored knight we see now. They have another name, the Order of the Dead Knight. These two forces can only be mobilized by an order in council signed by the chairman of the Privy Council. This shows that Arek's identity is likely to be promoted to a member of the Privy Council soon. If it's a coincidence enough, he may be filling the vacancy caused by the death of Amon. Oh, Veronica laughed softly, so it's still our responsibility. That's right, so today our duty is to continue to keep this vacancy empty. Brando said playfully, "The nobles of Erewhon often complain that the expenses of the noble parliament are too high. I think All for One Society must have the same problem. Let's find a way to help them solve it." These words made everyone laugh except for the nobles of Cruz, because Brando's words were a double-edged sword, ruthlessly mocking them. "You're so humorous, Mr. Brando." Miss Scholar naturally heard the hidden meaning in Brando's words and couldn't help but praise him softly. However, behind Miss Scholar, Scarlet seemed to be at a loss. She looked at Shido with slight jealousy and uneasiness, then touched the ring on her finger in fear. "I'm serious, but I have to remind everyone that the qualifications of a member of the Council of All for One Society are fanatical and wise beliefs. As for true fanatics, that's what they don't lack the least," Brando replied. "What do you mean?" Veronica suddenly heard the hidden meaning in his words. "As far as I know, the Order of the Dead Knight's order is no less than 30,000 people. Most of them have the strength that we're talking about now. And among the secular forces of All for One, the Order of the Dead Knight's order's status is far below that of the Order of Chaos," Brando said slowly. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, suddenly understanding why Brando asked them to stay calm. In the face of such a huge enemy, it was indeed better to be cautious. But Erek must die, not just because of the portal fragment in his hands, not just because of his identity as a member of All for One, but because I think there are people here who have more reason to seek revenge. Brando glanced at Peya, the hunter maiden's hands clenched into fists, her body tensed up and trembling slightly. After a long time, she opened her eyes and looked at Brando with her dark and somewhat wild eyes, and replied while panting, "Thank you, Lord Knight." Everyone understood what Brando meant. In fact, when they saw the dragon fly into the sky, they knew that Erek must be waiting for the frost dragon whelp of Frostfang to fly out of its nest, but he didn't know that he had made a fatal mistake. In the distance, the bodies of the two hunters fell silently on the snowy plains, the blood that flowed out and then froze into ice. Further away, Erek and his subordinates from All for One had already begun to enter the long and narrow crack. The nobles' private soldiers were the first to enter, followed by the Black Knights of Order of the Dead. They were divided into 3 groups and entered one after the other. Erek and his personal guards were the last to enter. Brando rubbed his hands and looked at the scene coldly. He didn't dare to get too close. Although he didn't have a big problem, he couldn't guarantee that the others wouldn't be noticed. The Silver Knight beside Erek, Sylvia, was a genuine elemental rank master, not to mention that there were a few wizards around him. Brando also didn't trust the crew's nobles that Veronica brought with her. In fact, the team had been maintaining magic silence. Other than him who could contact Medisha with his higher authority as a planeswalker, the others' communication channels were completely closed. No one could guarantee that the people around them weren't members of All for One. "Did you see the people around Erek clearly, little guy? There are a few wizards that I've never seen before, and I don't have any impression of them. They must be members of All for One. Devard is also among them. I thought he was dead. No wonder we couldn't find his body after the Battle of Ampere Seal." Brando nodded. "Are we going to wait here for them to come out?" Shido asked. "No, the ice caves below Frostfang extend in all directions, and there are many passages inside. We have to find a way to follow them and give the Grand Duke a surprise." Brando replied. "Now, wait a moment. But Mr. Brando, didn't you say that there was a frost dragon whelp inside?" Shido turned around and looked at him curiously. "I also said that it's very timid." Shido was indeed very timid, whether the dragon himself would admit it or not. One of the reasons he lived in those blue ice caves like spider webs was to avoid danger. This was a very comfortable point. Just like now, he could place his claws on the ice crevice that was covered in blue and white cracks and hide in the shadows. His green eyeballs were motionless as he spied on those uninvited guests. However, in recent days, it began to find it more and more difficult to move between these cracks. Erek's team was actually not far from Sheeta, but no one realized that there was a dragon lurking around them. Sheeta's huge white body with light blue streaks walked behind the translucent ice walls, and the crisscrossing ice prisms seemed to be his natural cover. He ordered his followers, a group of smelly ice cave dwellers covered in white hair, to attack the humans, while he himself created a landslide behind them. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 764. The subterranean dwellers were not worth mentioning, but the sudden collapse was a huge problem for Erek. When no one expected it, a huge crack suddenly appeared on the ice, and with a violent tremor, a half-mile-long tunnel under the ice collapsed. Huge chunks of ice came crashing down from all directions, and the noble's private soldiers were instantly killed or injured. The wizards beside Erek immediately used spells to support a light green barrier. The ice and snow that weighed more than a few tons squeaked as it pressed against the barrier. The ghostly faces of the wizards immediately paled, making them look more like their own kind. It was a pity that Sheeta did not intend to completely collapse his nest. Otherwise they might be finished along with his little spell. Sheeta walked through the falling ice as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. Frost dragons could hide themselves in ice breath. Through the ancient ability hidden in their blood, as long as they adapted to the environment, human powerhouses would definitely not be able to discover them. He silently came to Erek's side and stretched out his claws, wanting to tear this guy into pieces. But at this time, the 2 black knights beside Erek suddenly turned around, and the red eyes under the steel masks lit up slightly. "What is that?" they shouted at the same time. Sheeta jumped in fright and rushed forward, spreading his wings and crashing into their chests. With a muffled bang, the 2 black knights' breastplates caved in like cardboard, and they flew out at the same time, crashing into the ice wall behind them. Sheeta rushed forward and picked up the 2 corpses that had almost been smashed into metal plates. He did not dare to stay any longer and turned around to flee. Fortunately, the ice cave was shaking violently, and large amounts of ice and snow fell from above with a loud rumble. For a moment, no one noticed that two people were missing. It took a lot of effort for the wizards around Erek to stop the collapse and dig a tunnel through the ice. The former duke finally had the time to do a head count, and found that at least 300 of his private soldiers were missing. The Knight of Order had also suffered heavy casualties. His face immediately darkened. Devard spat out the snow in his mouth and walked over unhappily. He looked around with some fear. The power of nature was unimaginable to mortals. Even if he was an elemental awakened powerhouse, if the ice on both sides really collapsed, he would only be able to turn into a piece of solid ice that would be frozen forever. This must be the work of those cavemen. The female knight beside Erek covered her face and said hatefully. Sylvia's face was scratched by the sharp ice in order to protect her lord. Her face was covered in blood and she looked terrifying. Devard nodded. No one thought that the owner of this place had not left at all. They personally felt the dragon's aura that came from dozens of miles away. No one could imitate such an aura. Fortunately, they have retreated. Devard replied with some lingering fear. Erek looked at the tunnel that was temporarily opened. The cavemen had indeed disappeared without a trace. Dragons always had their followers. For example, the black dragon and the goblins, the red dragon and the kobolds often mixed together. The silver dragon often received the service of the elves, and the gold dragon liked to live with the fairies. It was not unusual for the frost dragon to leave some caveman in its lair for him to command. He thought for a moment and felt that there was nothing out of the ordinary, so he said, "Let's move on." What the Duke did not expect was that Sheeta was also scared out of his wits. He did not expect the Black Knight to be so powerful that he almost exposed his whereabouts. With this lesson, Sheeta immediately decided to give up on attacking these humans. Instead, he found a safe place to hide and see what they were up to. Sheeta felt that he was playing a game with these humans, but safety was his first consideration. This had nothing to do with courage but wisdom. At least that was what he thought. So in the following time he secretly followed behind these humans and did not attack. He saw that they did not feel bored at all through the long tunnel under the ice. He could not help but think that these humans were really boring. But soon he saw the group of humans walking into his lair. Erek slowly walked into the hall that was naturally formed by the ice. The hall was very spacious, but the surrounding ice formed a variety of strange prisms, and the whole hall was tinged with a faint blue hue. There was also a thin layer of ice fog on the ground. He looked up and his eyes fell on the trapezoidal ice wall in the middle of the hall. In the center of the ice wall was a rare gemstone. It was a gray gemstone, shining brightly without refracting the fire. From the inside to the outside, it emitted a bright light as if there was a sun inside. Erek pursed his lips and looked at the scene. The pale light from the gemstone carved a few deep shadows on his thin face. Although he was always serious, he had to admit that he had never seen a gemstone of such an amazing size. This gift from the ancient times was as tall as a person. Such a crystal did not exist in nature at all. It could only be a man-made creation. The Duke looked back indifferently. No one had ever seen the heart of the dragon, but the wizards could feel the endless power emanating from the gemstone. It was pure magic, the essence of magic after purification. The wizards of all for one could not help but reply with a trembling voice, "My lord, that may be the heart of the dragon." Erek nodded. In fact, he felt it himself. He had been in the realm of the Peak of Gold for some time, and he could sense the power of the gemstone. He could feel the waves of resonance emitted by the gemstone, as if there was a turbulent energy restrained in it, and it would break out at any time. According to historical records, the heart of the dragon was an eternal source of energy just like what they saw in front of them. Seeing Erek nod, the wizards immediately moved. They started from the periphery of the hall and used magic to explore the floor of the hall inch by inch. Although the pride of the dragons was unlikely to set up a trap, who knew if there would be a scum among the dragons? The result was just as Erek expected. The wizards soon returned with news that there were no traps, even on the icicle and the gemstone. The gloomy look on Erek's face eased a little, but it was still scary. He turned back and ordered the Black Knight behind him, "Go and take it down. Be careful not to break it. You should know how important it is to us." The Black Knights nodded and did as they were told. Under the leadership of a knight captain, a dozen Black Knights came to the icicle together. But it was at this time that something strange happened. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the dozen Black Knights, including the knight captain with elemental activation, disappeared without a trace. Everyone was stunned. So much so that the hall under the ice was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Those were 13 elemental activation powerhouses, as well as a true master of elemental activation. There was no reaction at all and they disappeared just like that? The wizards could not help but rub their eyes, almost thinking that they had seen wrongly. Erek turned his head coldly and looked at his subordinates. What's going on? The wizards looked at each other. No matter how they looked at it, it seemed like a trap. However, they had already checked it out and there shouldn't be any problems at all. As for the Grand Duke's question, they had no way of answering it and could only stand there dumbfounded. A disappointed look appeared on Erek's face. He pointed at the private soldiers on the other side and ordered, "You guys go over." The faces of the private soldiers immediately changed, but they had no choice in this place. They could only tremble and walk in that direction. Dilly 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 d. But it was at this moment that a miracle happened. The private soldiers of the nobles stood under the icicles perfectly fine. It was as if everything that had happened before was just an illusion. Erek was slightly startled and could not help but frown. But after a moment of hesitation, he immediately ordered the Black Knight, "You guys go over." The Black Knight's performance was much better than the private soldiers. They bowed slightly and then walked towards the icicles. But this time when they were about 30 feet away the same thing happened again. With a soft swoosh, all the Black Knight, including the private soldiers of the nobles, disappeared without a trace. Now everyone was stunned. The private soldiers of the nobles could be ignored as cannon fodder, but the two batches of Black Knight, together with the one lost in the previous collapse, were almost a third of the Black Knight that had been brought out in this operation. Even if the Privy Council were to investigate this loss, it was not something that anyone could bear responsibility for. Nearly 100 elemental activation powerhouses had disappeared just like that. No one could accept such a contrast. Erek's face was as cold as ice, complementing the surrounding environment. He seemed to have finally realized something. He turned around and roared, "Who is it? Get out here." The Grand Duke's voice rolled and echoed in the ice cave, but unfortunately, there was no response. This was because Sheeta was lying on the ground looking at what was happening under the ice. He could not help but roll around on the ground and let out a hissing laugh. But if someone happened to be there at this moment, they would see a white ball of flesh rolling around on the ground. No one would be able to tell that it was a dragon. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 765. Erek's voice was met with an empty echo. The expression on the Archduke's face at this moment was definitely like dark clouds gathering on the surface of the sea, as if an unprecedented terrible storm was brewing. However, few people noticed that he was frowning, and there was a hint of worry in his eyes. He was suddenly afraid that the damned dragon was still here. Seeing that his question was not answered, Erek breathed a sigh of relief. He was not Brando and he had never heard of a dragon that could be so cowardly. Erek had actually seen a giant dragon before. That was when he was young on the battlefield of the Holy War. He had seen the mount of the Kurlutz Emperor, Grando the Great. Ever since the Flame King Gretel, the Kurlutz royal family had a tradition of signing a contract with a giant dragon, which was one of the reasons why the Kurlutz Empire was so confident. He had a deep impression of the dragon's arrogance, so he did not doubt that there was a cunning and despicable dragon waiting to ambush them. Seeing that Erek's expression had relaxed, the people around him dared to speak. One of the wizards stepped forward and said, "My lord, we suspect that the dragon took advantage of our misunderstanding. It may have placed a trap on top of the cave. Please allow us to check it out." Erek nodded but still said, "Be quick. That stupid dragon should be back soon." The wizards nodded and did as they were told. Sure enough, it didn't take long for them to find a huge magic array on top of the Hall of Ice. When the All-for-One wizards inspected the magic array, they couldn't help but find out that it was actually a teleportation array. In other words, those unlucky fellows from before had mistakenly entered this teleportation circle and were sent to some unknown corner of the world. But the problem is, when a teleportation circle is activated, doesn't it require the consent of the person being teleported? This goes against the basic principles of magic. The wizards immediately felt that it was a little inconceivable. On top of the ice layer above them, Sheeta was laughing so hard that he was banging his head on the ground. Fortunately, the ice layer was thick enough, otherwise the people in the hall below might have noticed the abnormality. In fact, the reason was very simple. The magic circle covered a spherical space. When the magic circle began to take effect, Sheeta was also one of the recipients. So it just had to keep answering, "Yes, I'm the one who got teleported." Accept. Good. Activate the magic array. Then he could watch as the unlucky Black Knight was teleported away. As for why it hadn't been teleported away, the reason was even simpler. It was common knowledge that teleportation circles had their limits. If it could only transport 4-pound objects, it would not work on 6-pound goods. Within that limit, it would only work on the goods that could be used. And with a certain dragon's meatball-like body, it was almost certainly overweight. Sheeta remembered where the formation led to. It scratched its head as if it couldn't remember clearly. Anyway, it was a very far and not fun place. In short, Sheeta would definitely not want to go there. The all-for-one wizards studied under the magic circle for a long time, but they couldn't figure it out. In the end, they could only conclude that this was a dragon spell, an ancient string magic. Naturally, it wasn't something they could understand. As for the mysterious patterns on the magic circle that were clearly made up of modern magical runes, they naturally chose to ignore them. After all, the problem now was not to study the magic circle, but to find a way to appease Duke Arek's anger. Arek seemed to have noticed that these guys were fools. These wizards were his assistants from the Privy Council, but it was a pity that even as the chairman of the Privy Council, he couldn't mobilize the Order of Chaos alone. Therefore, other than the Black Knight, he could only find some lower-ranking members to make up the numbers. As for whether these people were reliable or not, it was clear at a glance. He snorted coldly and interrupted their nonsense. "Your mission is not to figure out how this spell works but to destroy it. We don't have much time, so you better not waste your precious lives. That frost WRM may be stupid, but it's more than enough to freeze you into popsicles." "My lord," the wizards quickly replied. "Although it's a little troublesome to figure out how this magic circle works, it's very simple to destroy it. Magic circles are actually very fragile, so they're usually hidden. However, this magic circle is actually floating on the ice. As long as a few spells are used to destroy it, it won't work anymore." Yes, that dragon does seem to be a little stupid. If it buried this magic circle behind the ice, it'll be much more troublesome for us to deal with, someone said aloud. Arek nodded, but he didn't think so. He felt that no matter how stupid the dragon was, it wouldn't be as stupid as these guys in front of him. Besides, he was already a little impatient. He waved his hand and let the wizards quickly deal with the magic circle. In the quiet passage, the sound of the previous avalanche still lingered. Brando and the others walked through the cracks of the glacier. They could even feel the buzzing under the dark blue ice on both sides. The young prince walked in front of everyone, holding the lion's fang tightly with both hands. In this enclosed environment he was as alert as a rabbit. If he had ears, they would have been pricked up. "Teacher, Madam Legion Commander, did you hear anything?" Haruz suddenly turned around and asked. "Sound? No, you mean the previous avalanche?" The scholar was startled and asked. "That's not an avalanche. It's the sound of the glacier collapsing somewhere here. It must be that coward's movement." The young frost dragons are born with the ability to manipulate glaciers. A cold voice interrupted her. The one who spoke was Alas. This young lady flew back from the battlefield. It was said that she didn't think it was fun there, so she hurried back. Brando asked her about the battle situation, and sure enough, everything was as expected. Freya's performance was better than expected. The only accident was probably the sudden snowstorm, but Maynard and Freya reacted in time and asked everyone to retreat to shelter. In fact, Brando actually suspected that the little female dragon flew in from the outside because she was afraid of the cold. Gold dragons, like red dragons, liked hot environments. Naturally, they could not adapt to such glaciers, not to mention the temperature in snowstorms that often dropped below zero. However, there were few storms on this glacier, and Brando suspected that there might be a magic tide behind it. As soon as Alas spoke, the others fell silent. Now everyone knew that the little girl in front of them was actually a terrible dragon. Even now the envoy Gerd was still lying on the stretcher. Allah's eyes were shining. Only Haruz was a little used to the habits of the young lady of the dragon race. He explained in a low voice, I'm not talking about that. Mr. Brando, did you hear that?" Brando nodded. He heard it more clearly than anyone else. In the buzzing caused by the avalanche, there was another sound mixed in. He turned back and looked at Veronica. The female Legion commander also had a look of concentration and held her breath. "It seems to be magic," she replied after listening for a while. "It's magic." Brando nodded. "Just the sound of the bombardment of magic energy? I seem to hear the sound of dark magic flames rising from the sea of magic. Only the wizards of the cult are good at using such magic. Black magic. Did Arek's people fight with the dragon? Veronica asked. Brando looked ahead and shook his head. I'm afraid not. I didn't feel the fluctuation of string magic. The ancient string magic of the dragon race is one of the most terrible spells. It is the complete opposite of black magic. It is a means of directly controlling the lines of law to constrain the bombardment of energy. Once someone uses string magic, the shock caused can be transmitted several miles away. You will definitely have the chance to see that kind of spiritual throbbing. Alaz heard this and snorted softly. She could not help but say, "Hey, you're very familiar with our spells." For such a question, Brando had already dealt with it easily. He casually replied, "All the wizards are trying to study your spells. Ancient string magic and ancient runic magic together are the origin of all magic. They're just fools. Our ancient magic comes from the memories in the bloodline. Mortals can't learn it no matter what." Alaz looked disapproving. Brendel did not refute. The magic system created by the Myrna people to this day was definitely not as bad as Alaz said. This was the era of mortals, and even the dragons had to admit this. However, he skipped this question and directly answered Veronica. "I think maybe Arek is dealing with the cave dwellers under the glacier." "You'll know when you see it," Veronica replied. The group continued to move forward and passed through the original path that Arek took. They did not encounter any resistance along the way. After half an hour, they found Sheeta's lair. But at this moment, it was beyond recognition. The first thing he saw when he walked into this naturally formed ice hall was potholes on the ground, broken ice walls, and corpses strewn all over the place. However, he looked around and did not see any corpses that belonged to the dragon or Arek. It was as if the two sides had a great battle, but no one could do anything to the other. Everyone was stunned, not knowing what had happened here, but Alaz was the first to react. Her golden eyes turned, and she ran over to one of the corpses, then checked some of the small objects on the body and then frowned. Among everyone, her figure flashed and suddenly disappeared from the hall. Just as everyone was dumbfounded by her actions, an earth-shattering shriek suddenly resounded from within the cavern. "Ah, Sister Alaz, I was wrong, let go." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 766. "Ah, Sister Alaz, I was wrong, quick, 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 let go." With a loud bang, the top of the ice hall suddenly burst open, and a huge creature fell from the sky with a large amount of snow and ice, landing heavily on the ground. Then Brando saw Alaz jump down from above. She walked slowly to the pile of snow, reached her hand into the snow, grabbed a tail, and then dragged a ball of meat out with a whoosh. Then everyone saw that it was actually a dragon. A round dragon. It was huge, almost as tall as a small two-story building, but the whole body was not like the beautiful streamlined shape that Alaz had when she transformed into a dragon. Instead, it was like a huge spindle, and the two pairs of wings were like the wings of the chicken that Brando had seen in the supermarket freezer in his previous life. The only difference was that there were some scales on it. Alaz grabbed its tail and dragged it out, its short and fat limbs flapping on the ground, screaming like a pig being slaughtered. Brando swore that he would never forget this scene in his life, because it was too stupid. In fact, he had never seen the true face of this dragon in his previous life, because this guy was too insidious. Often, players would be lying on the floor before they saw its face, just like Arek's noble private soldiers buried under the ice. As for the others, Shido and Haruz had long been staring with their eyes wide open. They could hardly believe what they saw or felt that their whole worldview had been turned upside down. Shida put his little claws on his head and cried out, "Let go of me, Sister Alaz, it's too embarrassing." His voice echoed in the cave, but it was hard for others to believe that such an imposing roar was actually begging for mercy. "You also know how to be embarrassed, Dragon God above. Look what you've done to your lair. How dare you set a trap in your lair? You've disgraced the face of the giant dragons." Alaz snorted coldly, raised her small fist and punched Sheeta's head. Her pink fist looked weak, but Sheeta flew out as if he had hit a meteorite, and with a loud bang, the broken half of the ice wall in the center of the hall was shattered into pieces. All the crew's nobles who saw this scene were now nervous, and those who had offended Alaz before felt a chill down their spines. Almost everyone was thinking, "God, this little girl is violent." But Alaz was indeed very violent. She seemed to be mad with anger, and just like an angry sister, she gave the fleshy dragon a good beating. Of course, this fat beating was from the dragon's point of view. If it had been anyone else, even Veronica would have been beaten to a pulp. The education campaign lasted for half an hour, and then Alaz dragged Sheeta with a bruised nose and swollen face to meet Brando. As Brando expected, Sheeta's human form was indeed a little fatty, but in the form of an elf. Elves who were passionate about beautiful things would probably want to stab him to death if they saw him like this. "I know you, human. My sister told me about you. She said that big sister has a crush on you." Sheeta said in a muffled voice as soon as he opened his mouth, but before he could finish, Alaz grabbed him by the wrist and threw him heavily over her shoulder onto the ice. She smashed the little fatty on the ground, then clapped her hands as if she had dropped a bag of flour, looked up and replied, "His sister is Flora, my life partner. You should have seen her before. You stole her earrings, do you remember?" Brando knew that the golden folk reproduced asexually, and the mates of dragons were in fact allies in a sense, but what was this blabbermouth talking about? What did she mean by he stole Flora's earrings? He looked back and saw Veronica and the others looking at him strangely. A man stealing a lady's earrings, what kind of behavior was that? Especially when this lady was a dragon. The men's eyes were full of admiration, but the women present had a complicated look in their eyes. "You're amazing, Mr. Brando." Shido praised from the bottom of her heart. "Earrings are very important to dragons. Legend has it that Tiamat and Bahamut were once twins, and Martha gave them 2 earrings respectively. One was called Order and the other was called Destruction. But since the era of chaos, the separated earrings have been given a symbol of love. I don't know if this saying has only been passed down in human time, but I didn't expect the Lord to have personally put it into action. For scholars, the combination of knowledge and action is a very important part." Brando just wanted to shut this senior's mouth, but Alaz had a smirk on her face. She reached out and stroked Shido's cheek and praised, "Little girl, you said it well." "This is praise?" Shido was slightly stunned and blushed a little. She knew the custom among dragons, that an elder putting his hand on a younger one's face was a sign of praise. Of course, in a sense, Alaz was indeed a lot older than her. "Correct, you're very smart." Alaz nodded. "This is the friendship I give you." All the crew's nobles present heard this sentence and their eyes turned red. Brando could not help but feel a little envious. The friendship of the dragons was the same as the friendship of the silver elves. It had a time limit, generally speaking it was a mortal's lifetime, and there was also a limit to the number of times, generally it was once. But this meant that as long as it was within the ability and preference of the dragons, they would help the mortals fulfill a wish. Shido was still in a daze, and Veronica had already gently patted her on the shoulder. She had brought Shido out for training and she liked this little girl very much. The whole empire was also unanimously optimistic about her as the next successor to the head of the Royal Library, and an important core figure of the future Blood Cross Association. Of course, the main reason was that the Bugas valued her. However, Veronica liked her purely out of love for the younger generation. Vahina was too willful, and the Prime Minister's daughter was too paranoid, especially the latter. Ever since Veronica knew what the other had done in Brando's territory, she had been frustrated, but she had to send the latter back to the Empire. No one knew better than Veronica about Brando's position in Erewhon at this moment. Among the nobles of the Empire, she was probably the only one who knew about Brando's other identity in the loop of trade winds, and his relationship with the Silver Folk. Erewhon was no longer the original Erewhon. After having Valhalla, it was destined to rise as a new empire. Sometimes Veronica even felt that she could see the faint shadow of the Flame King Gretel, or the Lionheart King Eric of the Erewhon people in Brando. Therefore she was very optimistic about Shido. Shido was pure and kind, far more suitable to be the link between Cruz and Erewhon than Vahina and the other Prime Minister's daughter. It was a pity that the others did not think as far as she did, and probably could not understand her thinking, so Veronica could only hide some of her arrangements for the time being. However, at least everything that had happened so far had proven that she had made the right choice. In her opinion, everyone around this very interesting little fellow was indeed not simple. Not only did he maintain close ties with the Silver Folk, but the dragons also favored him. And Shido benefited from it almost immediately. At least, whether she had a wish to fulfill or not, the friendship of the dragons would have a profound impact on her life. As long as this news was spread back to the Empire, the qualifications of an important member of the Blood Cross in the future might become the next president of the Blood Cross. However, Brando interrupted the conversation between the two. He knew that he could not let this discussion continue. This little female dragon was definitely deliberately making fun of him. She knew that he had just gotten the earring by accident. He suddenly remembered something and asked, "Wait, Fu Luofa is his sister, and the big sister he was talking about is?" Brando was halfway through his words when he suddenly saw the golden flames in Allah's eyes. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart. The little female dragon bared her white teeth at him, making Brando realize that it was better not to continue on this issue. However, he had a subtle feeling in his heart and could not help but look at Allah strangely. "What are you looking at?" Allah glared at him and snorted coldly, "Is there a flower on my face?" "No." Brando quickly shook his head. What a joke! It was no joke to annoy this little female dragon. Sheeta was still lying on the ground with a bloody nose and a swollen face. He was a dragon, born with the strength of a gold rank, and in fact after elemental activation his pure physical strength was close to the level of a perfect body. If the little female dragon intended to make an example of him, he would probably be torn to pieces in minutes. "Humph, you don't have to be surprised. As I said, I still have a good impression of you. Even as a backup mating candidate, it's not impossible." Allah blushed and continued. But these words were a bit too fierce. Shido was stunned and Scarlet seemed a little helpless. Veronica looked at the young couple, with a smile. As for the other crew's nobles, the way they looked at Brando was equivalent to looking at a dragon. Or rather, they might not be so surprised to see a dragon at this moment. Some of the bolder knights of the Folded Sword Knight Regiment even gave Brando a thumbs up. "No one will think you're a mute if you shut up." Brando could not help but reply with gritted teeth. Allah glanced at him and snorted softly, "Who allowed you to talk to me in such a tone? But forget it, I'm too lazy to argue with you." After saying that, she turned and left, disappearing outside the hall in the blink of an eye. "Mr. Brendel?" Shido seemed to have been scared out of her wits. She finally managed to say something. You don't have to say anything, this is all a misunderstanding." Brando knew that he was played by the little female dragon again. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 767. Alaz did not leave for long, but she was called back by Brando, for no other reason than that they still had to get information from Sheeta, the fat dragon. Unfortunately, this timid dragon whelp refused to meet anyone other than Alaz. Brendel had no choice but to ask a female dragon whelp to drag him out of his storage room. But after the guy was dragged out, the first question he asked immediately shocked Brando. "What? You mean you exchanged a star-shaped stone for the heart of the dragon and let Erek take it away?" Brando stared at the little fatty with a swollen nose and a swollen face in front of him, and his heart suddenly felt as if there were 10,000 antelopes roaring across the endless grassland of Central Africa. The little fatty nodded with an innocent look, as if what he exchanged was not a star-shaped stone, but a cobblestone casually picked up from the river. Despicable, shameless, insidious and cunning. He made an attribution in his heart, but still felt that it was not enough and had to add, too insidious, too shameless. What is a star-shaped stone? Veronica looked at Brando's strange expression as if he had eaten a crab raw. She knew that there must be something wrong with this so-called star-shaped stone, but she searched her memory and could not find any relevant information. She thought that this must be a kind of gem, and there was indeed a type of gem called the star-shaped sapphire, but that was just a general luxury, and did not seem to have any connection with the current situation. Besides, Veronica felt that even if Erek's brain had been swept by a dragon's tail, he would not have mistaken the star-shaped sapphire for the heart of the dragon. "Have you heard of the elemental frontier?" Brando looked back with a strange expression and asked. "I know, the elemental frontier is the border of Wond, and Lady Martha put the code of law on the Sea of Magic to form a stable world. The 4 elemental worlds guard the 4 directions of Wond, but scholars generally believe that these 4 directions are not in a spatial sense. The part of the elemental boundary that can be seen with the naked eye should be above the sky." Shido whispered. "Good answer. People generally think that the elemental frontier is an abstract or theological concept, but in fact, it really exists, and there are some special creatures living there. It is said that the giant whales of the heaven realm, which are as huge as mountains, swim on the elemental border, but they can only be seen on the day of the 3 moons. Brando paused for a moment as if he was stuck. He really felt that this matter was too outrageous. It was simply unimaginable. As for this star-shaped stone, it's actually a more euphemistic name for it. Seriously speaking, I think it's better to call it the excrement of the heavenly whale. Huh. The Kurlut's noble officers present felt that they had seen or heard all the bizarre things in their lives today, and some even couldn't help but ask, "My lord, you mean this dragon? Lord tricked Erek with a piece of the celestial whale's excrement?" These words were really a bit witty, and the crowd couldn't help but burst into laughter. But Brando glanced at Sheeta, who was sitting calmly on the side. If that was all, of course, it could only be regarded as a funny anecdote, but he knew more. He coughed and continued to remind them, in fact it's far more than that, the star-shaped stone. Although it's excrement, it's not wrong to say that it's priceless, it's just that most people can't use it. So, Brando, what's going on? Veronica frowned suspiciously and asked carefully. The heavenly whale feeds on energy on the elemental frontier, and its excrement is actually the residue of heterogeneous energy. It's just that the heavenly whale has a huge appetite. To what extent? It needs to eat enough magic power every day to sustain the Buga's floating city for 100 years. Because it's on the edge of the sea of magic, there's an endless supply of magic power for it to absorb. Brando stopped and asked, do you know what it means to have more heterogeneous magic power? The Shire's face suddenly changed. Wait, it can't be? He muttered to himself. You guessed right, the star-shaped stone is an unstable superbomb that can explode at any time. Most of the star-shaped stones will be destroyed when they enter the law of Tiamat. I don't know where Sheeta got this thing from, but I know that Erek may be in big trouble soon, if he intends to put that thing on his precious portal. Brando replied in a daze. Veronica was also slightly startled. How powerful is it? Brando looked back at her. He wanted to ask the female Legion commander if she knew of a weapon called a thermonuclear weapon, but the latter obviously had not heard of it, so he thought for a moment and described it. It's enough to completely flatten Lushta from one end to the other. Are you kidding? Veronica blurted out. Behind her, the noble officers of Cruz sat there as if they had seen a ghost, and for a moment, they seemed to be petrified. No, what I said is true. I don't know how this thing appeared and won't. In theory, it should have ceased to exist before it entered this world. Brando murmured. At this point he suddenly thought of something and turned his head subconsciously. Sure enough, he saw the hunter girl Peya's face turn pale. My brother? We have to find a way to stop them. Veronica also immediately reacted. Martha, above, this thing will completely flatten the stained frost forest. Brando, the seal in the center of the stained frost forest. Brando nodded. In fact, he had thought of this for a long time. He couldn't help but glare fiercely at Sheeta. This guy doesn't understand the situation. Once this thing explodes, not only them but even this damn dragon will turn into ashes. They can't escape from this place in a short time. Those guys spied on my treasures, of course they deserve this. Sheeta pouted and replied with an unconvinced look. Of course, the so-called treasures it was referring to was the food it had stored in several caves. Marcia, above, this Frost WRM was not lying at all. If anyone dared to touch its food, it would rather destroy the world and take revenge. As for flattening the stained frost forest, what was that? Aren't you the guardian here? Shido stared at the little fatty in disbelief. Sheeta looked disdainful and replied, Tisk, I only agreed because that guy promised to give me delicious food every day, but the food he gave me was not delicious at all. Don't think I don't know that he used magic to conjure it. That food is really annoying, I didn't want to do it for a long time. The funny thing is that those idiots actually thought that they could lure me out by going to the holy cathedral of the hibernator. What a bunch of idiots, I might as well go back to sleep if I have the time. Before he could finish his words, he was hit hard on the head. Alaz glared at him and slapped him on the back of the head, almost sweeping the little fatty under the ice. You idiot, don't you have the least bit of shame of the dragon race? You actually sold yourself for a little food and became a watchdog for others? She was so disappointed that she could not help but scold him loudly. Also, you actually gave away such a fun thing so casually. That heart of the giant dragon or whatever rubbish, isn't it better to just throw it out? Fun thing? Fun thing? Fun thing? Brando, Shido, and Veronica had the same thought in their minds at the same time. What was fun about this? This thing can take a person's life, okay? Have you two figured out what's wrong with it? Brando suddenly felt a little powerless and felt that it was a very wrong choice to give the lead of the topic to this little female dragon. He hurriedly interrupted them and said, Wait, don't talk about this first. I don't know. Sheeta's answer was so clean that it was obvious at a glance that the fatty was lying. But this time Brando did not intend to let Alaz come. He turned back and called, Haruz, come here. The little prince looked at him blankly and came over with the lion's fang in his hand. He asked somewhat puzzledly, Teacher, is there anything I can do for you? You go over and persuade him to tell us where Erek went. Brando said, pointing to Sheeta. Meh. The little prince looked puzzled. I can? Of course, don't worry, he will listen to you like a dog in a while. But remember, don't give it all, don't sell yourself. Brando replied faintly. Give it all? Give what? The little prince blushed, but he could not go against his teacher's words. He could only bite the bullet and walk over. When Sheeta saw Haruz, his eyes lit up slightly, but soon showed a disappointed look and said loudly, "What, he's obviously a man, I won't be interested in this kind of guy. Quick, find me a little girl, maybe I'll agree to tell you the news you want to know." Brando almost pulled out Haurangaya and slashed at him immediately, so that he could cut this nasty and lecherous fat dragon in half. He took a light breath and told himself to calm down. The other party was a dragon, even if it was a young dragon, it was not something he could deal with. But this guy was really nasty to a certain extent. What was he thinking? Brando finally calmed down and saw that Sheeta's eyes suddenly became motionless, or to be exact, nailed to Haruz. Then everyone saw that this guy's eyes were blurred, and a line of crystal-clear saliva flowed from the corner of his mouth in public. At that moment, it was as if a group petrification spell fell from mid-air. Except for Brando, whether it was the crew's nobles, Brando's accompanying knight, even Shido and Veronica were stunned for a moment. What was going on? As the person in question, the young prince was shocked. He shouted, What are you doing?" But Sheeta seemed to have heard nothing and pounced on him. At that moment, Alaz could not help but look back. Brando laughed in his heart. Sure enough, it was exactly the same as what those guys mentioned. "You're obviously a child and you're still pretending." He heard Haruz scream but thought so in his heart. P.S. The strong in your hearts will never wither, 5 times a day fighting the heavens and the earth. From today onwards, I've decided to change my name to 5 times Glaze. No, 5 times Strong Baboon. Okay, I'm asking for monthly votes. I'm asking for 5 times the monthly vote support. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for recommendation and monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 769. Sheeta licked each of his chubby fingers one by one, and then looked up at Haruz with an unsatisfied look, scaring the little prince so much that he quickly covered the honey jar at his waist. That was bought by Brando from the hunters before entering the stained frost forest, although it was used a lot on the ferries. "Do you still want it?" Brando stared at the guy and asked to draw his attention back. Sheeta turned his head and nodded like he was pounding garlic. Yes, yes. Alaz could not help but snort in dissatisfaction when she saw this scene. This guy was really a disgrace to the dragon race. She could not believe that a proud dragon would be bought over by half a jar of honey. Half a jar of gems was more like it. The little female dragon thought angrily. She simply turned around and left, unwilling to stay here for a minute longer. She really wanted to pretend that she did not know him. Sheeta was completely unaware and just looked at Brando eagerly. His expression was naturally faked. Brando knew, but he still found it funny. "Don't look at me like that, you know what we want to know." Well, those guys ran away from the other end. That tunnel leads to an exit outside. I can point it out for you. Sheeta pretended to think for a moment, and then his memory seemed to be restored by half a jar of honey before he answered slowly. Brando glanced at the direction he pointed, but did not change his expression. Instead he asked, "You must be very familiar with this place. After all, you have lived here since the year of the venomous spider. More than 100 years is enough for you to figure out every passage under this glacier." "How do you know?" The little fat dragon opened his mouth wide and looked at Brando, dumbfounded. "Because of the documents, you fool." Alaz heard the sound coming from the entrance of the cave. She turned around and reminded him in annoyance, "Humans like to record all kinds of strange things on perishable paper, no matter how big or small they are. You don't think that if you rob them of their food they'll be okay with it, do you?" Brando nodded and replied slowly, "Before coming here, I've borrowed the history of the Manowir region from Kirkle's archives. The first time you appeared was during the year of the venomous spider. You plundered a convoy transporting flour." "Wait, why did you rob the convoy that was transporting flour?" The little female dragon widened her golden eyes in confusion and asked while gnashing her teeth, "Are you going to bake your own bread? Why haven't I heard you mention this before?" Sheeta lowered her head and blushed. "I thought it was white sugar." "Enough." Alaz shouted, "Get lost, don't talk to me again, I want the patriarch to expel you from the clan." After saying that, she angrily ran out. Brando looked at her terrifying appearance and was afraid that this little female dragon would not be able to hold herself back and kill Sheeta. When he saw Alaz running out, he breathed a sigh of relief and turned back to ask, "So am I right?" "Almost." Sheeta replied weakly. "What's wrong?" Brando looked at him and could not help but be a little curious. "The dragon clan doesn't restrict you much, does it?" "It's okay. Sheeta suddenly became a little vigilant and glanced at Brando with his pair of small but bright blue eyes on his chubby face. Cunning human, don't think you can get any useful information out of me even if you tell me these useless things. What do you want to know? Not as cunning as you. Brando thought to himself, this guy's honest appearance is definitely a wonderful disguise, but in fact, only those who have dealt with him know the messy things in his head. He replied, since you know every passage under this glacier, you must know if there is a shortcut for us to catch up with a wreck, right? Why should I tell you? Sheeta asked, rolling his eyes. Brando had expected this reaction and was not surprised. He only turned back to the little prince and said, Huruz, give it to me. With that, he stretched out his hand. Huruz looked at him reluctantly. This forest was not as comfortable as the palace. The honey was his favorite candy and he would only eat a little every day. If he handed it over, there would be nothing left of the honey. The little prince was not stupid. He looked past Brando and glared at Sheeta with some dissatisfaction. Give it to me. Brando winked at him and insisted. Teacher. The little prince did not dare to disobey. He could only walk up slowly, untie the jar tied to his waist, and put it in Brando's hand with a pout. Brando patted him on the shoulder and put a candy in his hand. This lactose was a new product of Tonajal. In this world where food was scarce, candy was a luxury that only the nobles could afford. However, it was very popular among the nobles of Erewhon. The Roman lady had been eyeing this business for a long time, and Brando had helped her with a lot of ideas. After all, compared to Wond, the material life of modern society was much richer. Huruz held the ball of lactose and could not help but be surprised. He had tasted this candy in Tonajal. Although he usually only got a reward on the day he practiced swordsmanship particularly well, he would never forget the taste for the rest of his life. He carefully put the candy in his bag, and then sat back with his lion's tooth in satisfaction. Of course, Sheeta also saw this scene. He looked at the honey jar in Brando's hand and then looked at the little prince's actions. There was a strong light of curiosity in his eyes, but he resisted the urge to speak. Brando saw this childish action and could not help but laugh. How about it? A piece of information for half a jar of honey. It's not a loss for you, is it? He suddenly felt a little startled. He felt that what he said was like those strange uncles who used lollipops to kidnap lollipops. However, he did not have a lollipop, and the little fatty in front of him was not a lollipop. Sheeta was a dragon and a very bad one at that. Even the dragons did not like him. There is such a passage. When Sheeta heard Brando's condition, he could not help but reply with saliva dripping from his mouth. He was really drooling. He bared his mouth and silver silk flowed down from the corner of his mouth. After a while it dripped all over the ground. This scene really made people wonder how this guy's saliva glands were so developed. Can you point it out for me? Sheeta nodded vigorously with the jar of honey in Brando's hand. Brando smiled and handed over the jar of honey. You keep your word. This is you dash, humph. Sheeta quickly hugged the jar and replied proudly, You're a man of your word. You're much better than that blue guy. But I heard that you humans are extremely cunning. Why are you so stupid? Brando almost couldn't breathe. He coughed twice and hurriedly said in his heart, A child's words carry no harm, a child's words carry no harm. But even so, he almost wanted to directly activate his berserk talent and beat this damn little fat dragon up again. That has nothing to do with you. Besides, this is not called stupidity. This is called honesty. I don't need to lie to a little kid like you. He replied with gritted teeth. Sheeta, can you lead the way for us? No. Sheeta flatly refused, as if this sentence didn't need to go through his brain at all. Brando looked at him as if he wanted to hear this guy's reason. Are you sure? Of course. It's too troublesome. That tunnel is very long and we have to walk a very long distance. Think about it. After walking such a long way we still have to come back later. Even if you give me 7 or 8 jars of honey, I won't agree. Besides, Sheeta naturally added, it's so cold outside. It's so cold outside. You're a frost dragon, okay? Brando had never heard of a frost dragon being afraid of the cold in his life. Frost dragons even had the ability to control glaciers. They were born in glaciers. Legend has it that the cold was their breath. Every frozen fog on the ice field was their warm and comfortable home. And it was such a dragon that actually told him that it was too cold outside. Brando resisted the urge to go berserk with great difficulty. He calmed down and replied, It's cold outside but you're not that good inside, right? Nope, I have food here. Sheeta replied proudly. Your food can go to hell. Brando screamed in his heart, but his face was as calm as ever. How much food do you have? You rob those humans every once in a while, but they're getting smarter. What can you rob? Jerky? Salted fish? Or hardened rye bread? Cheetah, these things you've collected are not food at all. In their eyes, they're just garbage. You can ask them if you don't believe me. Brando pointed to the crew's nobles not far away. Cheetah looked back curiously. Those nobles had already received the signal from Veronica's eyes. Besides, even at this moment, Brando was not someone they dared to offend. Besides, what Brando said was not a lie. Jerky, salted fish, and hardened rye bread. These things were only sought after by the poor. Nobles, even the smallest of nobles, would not touch these things. So they nodded in unison. Cheetah's eyes widened, and his blue eyes were sparkling. Really? There's something more delicious than these things. Oh. As he spoke, his saliva flowed out. Brendel did not know how to describe the dragon, because its saliva was actually dripping onto his black noble's coat. He resisted the urge to send the damn dragon flying with his sword and nodded. Of course, you can't just rob and rob here for the rest of your life, right? The dragons can't agree with your values because they don't understand the true meaning of delicious food. If there's a chance, I'll take you to 9 Phoenix. It said that they have the most exquisite food in the world. Cheetah's eyes sparkled as if he had been immersed in a moment in the future. But he quickly wiped his mouth and woke up. Brando saw that Cheetah's eyes had regained clarity. He had to praise the dragon for being the most intelligent high-grade creature. He had completely calmed down so quickly. Unexpectedly, Cheetah rubbed his nose and said, "That's great. When are we going?" Veronica couldn't help but cough when she heard this. Brando took a deep breath, opened his mouth and swallowed back the words he wanted to say. Then he said premeditatively, "Anytime, but do you want to consider leaving here with me? I promise to provide you with enough exquisite food. I guarantee you've never heard of it before." "Wait, you're scheming again, human." The little fat dragon suddenly raised his head and looked at Brando with some vigilance. "But I have to eat a ton of candy every day? You're a pig." Brendel almost blurted it out, but he clenched his teeth and said, "No problem. You know, I have a very large territory and I have many sugar workshops. I can guarantee that I can satisfy your requirements." "Really?" Cheetah looked doubtful, but his chubby face was full of yearning. Shido finally couldn't help but laugh. In her opinion, the dignified Count of Tonagel had become a sugar factory director in the eyes of this dragon. This was really too incredible. It was not until this moment that the scholar deeply understood this sentence. If you don't go out of the door, you will never know the world. At least until now, the majesty of the dragons in this world had basically collapsed in Shido's eyes. "Of course it's true," Brando replied snappily, "but do you understand my request? You've taken benefits from me, so you have to do things for me. You don't want me to feed you for free, do you?" He had to remind her because this guy in front of him was not reliable at all. Of course, if he could ally with a dragon, even if it was a young dragon, it would have a profound impact on Erwin's situation. Brando raised his head and glanced at the nobles of crews not far away. Those guys were obviously stunned and didn't think of this for the time being. Only Veronica and he looked at each other. The Legion commander smiled at him. Unexpectedly, Cheetah frowned and replied impatiently, "That's why you're really stupid. Of course I understand. Isn't it just signing a contract?" I signed a contract with that damn guy, but since that guy can't fulfill the requirements of the contract, I have now decided to unilaterally terminate the contract with him." He raised his eyelids and glanced at Brando. "How is it, have you written the contract?" Brando looked at this guy dumbfounded. He suddenly felt that this damn fatty was pretending to be a pig to eat the tiger. Why did he suddenly speak so eloquently? What Won's contract and what not? It seemed that even he didn't know much about it except for the Roman. "No. Not yet." "Oh, that's okay, we can make a verbal contract first." When it came to food and contracts, Cheetah seemed to have become shrewd and replied, "I swear in the name of the dragon god." "You can swear in the name of Martha." But Brando was completely confused. He stared at this little fatty who suddenly became serious and wondered if there was some kind of conspiracy. Or was there some kind of setting in the game? Did the players try to kidnap this guy in the past? While he was thinking about these messy things in his mind, he blurted out a sentence that he would regret for the rest of his life without thinking. "Verbal contract? Do we still need to make a pinky promise or something?" Cheetah looked at Brando as if he was looking at an idiot again. The little fatty blinked his eyes as if he thought he heard wrong. "What are you talking about? I didn't expect Big Sister to have a crush on a retarded child." Ha. At this moment, the Shire finally couldn't help but burst out laughing. "P.S. I'm so tired from writing yesterday. I'll only update once today to recover my energy. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 770. Sir Commander, we have already walked for almost 2 miles. The mountain that was used as a landmark can no longer be seen behind us. With such a heavy snowstorm, I'm afraid we will get lost if we continue walking. The night cruise patted the snow on his breastplate and looked at the snowy sky with some worry. The biting cold wind pushed the snowflakes between the sky and the earth. This snowstorm came so suddenly that no one had time to prepare. The knight looked at the bad weather with some concern and expressed his opinion to the female knight in front of him. Freya stopped and sighed in her heart. Her face was red from the cold and her eyebrows were covered with frost. But Freya blinked and replied, "No, let's move forward another 500 meters. They are injured and can't run far." Freya, if they were injured we would have caught up with them long ago. No one can run too far in this weather. Maynard's voice came from behind. Everyone turned around. The female knight was as calm as ever. At the same time she reminded in a cold tone, "There's something fishy about this. Have you forgotten what Brund and the others said? But that could be an illusion on the ice field, the refraction of the sun, or the snowy shadow of the crystal forest. It could have produced a similar illusion. He said he saw wolves. Do you know what that means?" Maynard interrupted her. "This storm was brought by wolves. This is not a good sign. The Myrnas fear wolves because wolves are part of the twilight, representing doom and the destruction of the world. But, didn't the others not see it?" Freya was not sure. She looked at the white snow in the depths of the sky and felt that there was a pair of pale eyes watching them from behind the snowy shadow. The others were the same. They always felt that this glacier was malicious towards them. It was as if a stranger would suddenly appear behind them without a sound. It made their hair stand on end. The whistling of the wind was like an endless mournful wail. Maynard paused for a moment. Her voice was as cold as ice. She looked at the others coldly. "Nothing is impossible in the Black Forest. Everything is possible. If you have a premonition that something bad is about to happen, then it will definitely get worse." Of course, the Knight of Cruz had heard of this proverb and felt his scalp tingle. Freya was also hesitant. At this moment, a person suddenly stumbled out of the snow in the distance. That person was the second batch of scouts sent out not long ago. Their mission was to find the first batch of scouts sent out half an hour ago. But when Freya saw the expression on this person's face, her heart sank slightly. "Little Pero, Aaliyah, Sir Commander, Emerald and Anika. What's going on?" "Shut up, Aaliyah, let His Excellency the Commander ask the questions." Before Freya could speak, the knight behind her spoke first, but little Pero, who was next to Freya, turned his head and interrupted the man's words. The thin black-haired knight exhaled softly and forced his companion back with a cold gaze. "It's okay. What's going on?" Freya had no time to be distracted. She looked at the scout and asked, "What happened to them?" "I don't know. When we found them, they were already. The scout's shoulders were almost trembling. Seeing him like this, the others' faces instantly sank. They were comrades in arms and had graduated at the same time. They swore that they would make a name for themselves in the upcoming Holy War. But today they were defeated in such a small place. Everything that happened here wouldn't even be remembered by anyone. How could this be? How could there be something that could kill them? In this damned backwater? The knight couldn't help but jump up and curse angrily. "You shut up, Aaliyah." Little Pero still scolded him coldly. But he turned his head and his eyes fell on Freya. Freya's heart was also a little depressed. This was the first time her subordinates had suffered casualties. For a moment she even thought of Bessa's face. However, the future Valkyrie blinked her eyes and shook her head. Who killed them? Was it those halflings? His Excellency the Commander? Emerald and Anika. The scout's face showed a look of fear. They died a little strangely. Strangely? I can't say. We can't see what killed them. There were no obvious wounds on their bodies, but it was as if their blood had been sucked dry. But there were no vampire bite marks on their bodies either. He took a deep breath and said with wide eyes, "That guy Lolo said they were frozen to death. There are ghosts in the ice and snow that will extract people's essence, but I think that guy is talking nonsense." "Who is Lolo?" Freya turned back. "He has the blood of the mountain people and the Myrnas. He's a weird guy." Little Pero replied. Freya was a little surprised. She did not expect the Empire to not discriminate against the mountain people and the Myrnas. But her thoughts only stayed on this matter for a moment, and then she replied, "Take us there and have a look. Freya, have you thought about it?" But on the side, Maynard frowned at this decision. "Senior," Freya looked up, "Brando abhors evil, and Erwin's people are not people who do not take revenge. Whether they are Cruz's people or not, they died at my hands. I don't ask for immediate revenge for them, but at least find out who killed them." "I understand," Maynard replied faintly. She grabbed the reins of the Valkyrie as if she had expected Freya to answer like this. She just said, "I'm just reminding you. Have you thought it through?" "I've thought it through." Freya replied resolutely. Her words pierced through the wind and snow, causing everyone to shudder. But the Kurlutzians finally had a trace of approval when they looked at her. Leneret Aurelius looked at the silhouette of the figure that was becoming more and more obvious in the wind and snow. His slightly tanned face that was hardly like a member of the royal family had always maintained an unchanged expression, but this did not mean that he did not pay attention to everything that was happening around him. At least the young man who was slowly approaching him on a horse fell into his eyes. "Your Highness Leneret." Haruz looked at the tall young man with some envy. The other party was also the first heir to the throne, just like him but much calmer than him. For so long, other than announcing his name, the other party had hardly said a word. This steadiness made him very curious. Haruz was eager to know how to do better with his identity and how to appear so confident. Leneret Aurelius looked back at the young man and replied, "Your Highness Haruz, under the rule of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, you and I are equal. You don't have to fall behind me. This is against the etiquette of the two countries." Haruz blushed. He didn't expect to make a mistake in etiquette all of a sudden. He didn't mean to, but he was used to following behind his sister or teacher. Reminded, he quickly loosened the reins and stepped forward. "Your Highness Leneret, have you ever thought about the fact that you will inherit a huge empire in the future? Thousands of people, their future depends on your hands. Have you ever thought about what will happen if you do something wrong? I'm sorry, although it's very rude to say this, but I often think about it." Haruz asked in a low voice. "That's not rude." Leneret replied, "Of course I've thought about it. It's part of my power and responsibility in itself. As for the thousands of people, their future depends on my hands. You're right, if I do it right they will sing praises, and if I do it wrong they will bear the responsibility." Haruz heard these remarks and couldn't help but widen his eyes. "How can this be? Because by then I will be the supreme emperor, and in this capacity, I naturally have to maintain the majesty of the imperial power. It's the same for you. When you grow up to a certain age you'll understand this. God has given us this power and we should be careful to maintain it." Leneret Aurelius raised his head and replied proudly, "But shouldn't the duty of the royal family be to fulfill the nobles' contracts and bring a happier and more stable life to his people?" Haruz was dumbfounded. "Who told you this?" Leneret turned back and asked. "It's my teacher and my sister." The young prince replied in a low voice. "What they said is wrong. Your sister is only a woman, and that earl must have other plans." The eldest son of the emperor faintly replied. Haruz felt that there was something wrong with this statement, but for a moment he didn't know where to refute it. He couldn't help but stutter, but my teacher is a very upright and knowledgeable person. If you discuss it with him, Your Highness Leneret, you will understand this." "There's no need." Leneret Aurelius replied, "Haruz, you are the only one here who is qualified to talk to me as an equal. I don't have to listen to the opinions of the others. Even in your country, Your Highness, the Count is not an important minister so far. You should learn to choose your own rights." Haruz was slightly startled and nodded as if he understood. And at the same moment, Brando saw a certain silver fairy princess coming through the wind and snow. He threw a candy to Sheeta, who was not far behind him, and let the fat dragon run to the back happily. Then he raised his head and asked Medisha the first thing he said. "Is Freya not back yet?" "I'm sorry, my lord, I didn't persuade her." Medisha frowned and shook her head worriedly. "It's not your fault." Brando looked up at the changing sky and replied softly, "I know Freya's personality. The weather is a little strange, but maybe we have to go against the wind. P.S. I wasn't feeling well yesterday and today. It seems that I won't be able to get full attendance this month again. I'm speechless. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 772. Several ice sculptures were either sitting or lying in the snow. Men and women had the same stiff and empty expression on their faces. Their eyes were almost frozen into ice as they stared straight at the sky. Freya felt a little sad as she walked past these ice sculptures. She silently touched their cold eyelids with her hand. Just like what the scout said before, Emerald and Anika did not have any obvious wounds on their bodies. Their skin was gray and white, losing moisture and shrinking together. Together with the corpse of the warhorse that was kneeling below them, they were covered with snow. On the surface they looked like people who had frozen to death in the snow. But how could 5 or 6 people coincidentally freeze to death together? Moreover, Anika and Emerald were both gold-ranked warriors. This kind of low temperature should not affect them at all. Freya noticed Emerald and Anika's empty eyes. In her memory, there was a way to die that had similar eyes, and that was to be taken away by the spirits. Thinking of this, she suddenly remembered the night when they escaped from Fortress Reeden. Brando used the white stag to guide them. Under the dense night sky, the majestic creatures emitting fluorescent white light opened a path in the forest. But what she remembered most were those who died in the hands of the spirits. Their faces were pale and they were sweating profusely. They also had the same empty look as if they had lost their souls. Freya raised her head. She raised her head a little vigilantly. She and the team were already in a silver-gray forest. The whistling snow wind passed through the bare branches, and those branches made a strange sound as if monsters were howling in the forest. It's ghosts. The monsters in the forest can absorb people's souls. This forest must be their territory. We have to leave here as soon as possible. Among Cruz's night, a dark-skinned young man said nervously, "When I was young, I often heard the old people talk about them. No one can kill them. Once they entangle us, we are dead." Enough, Rollo. You are a gold-ranked warrior. Not many of those spirits and ghosts are your opponents. If they come, we can avenge Emerald and Anika. The knight named Aaliyah replied impatiently. He turned back to look at Freya and asked, "Miss Freya, do you think there really might be ghosts in this forest?" The commander he referred to had also been upgraded to Miss Freya, because Freya's decision had won the trust of every Cruz person present, and trust was the basis of cooperation. Anika is similar to you. They died without any warning. What can you do about it? Lolo was unwilling to let him off. He stared at him and asked, "So we should run away with our tails between our legs?" "Enough, don't mention Anika to me, it will only make me angry, Lolo, don't make me look down on you." Aaliyah replied angrily. "Aaliyah, shut up. Is this how you talk to your companions?" Little Pero finally could not help it. He tugged at the soft gray squirrel fur hood and reprimanded, then turned back to Lolo and said, "Lolo, a knight swears by folding his sword that he will never abandon his companions. I will pretend I didn't hear what you said before, but don't let me hear it a second time." The dark-skinned young man seemed to be a little afraid of him. After being warned, he did not dare to talk back. He could only stare silently. Aaliyah also snorted coldly and turned back. He grabbed his sword and looked in the direction of the forest. It seemed that although he did not believe Lolo's words, he had at least raised his guard. Little Pero turned back and looked at Freya and asked, "Miss Freya, what do you think? Lolo is at least right about one thing. Anika and the others died without warning. Even if it was a sneak attack, it was too peaceful. Anika is a veteran scout, not inferior to me in the slightest." Freya frowned. The bodies of Anika, Emerald, and the others did not look like they had experienced a fight when they were alive. They looked like they were walking and suddenly fell dead here, but those were 4 gold-ranked warriors. She looked in that direction and suddenly noticed a subtle detail. "Senior, did you notice their gazes?" "Huh?" Maynold raised her eyebrows slightly. "Anika and the others should have been looking ahead when they were alive. That's the forest. There may be something in the forest that attracted their attention." Freya replied. "What exactly did they find in the forest?" Aaliyah asked. "It certainly can't be an attacker. If the attacker came from the direction of the forest, Anika and the others would not have no reaction at all." Little Pero replied. The others looked at each other and could not think of anything in the forest that could make Anika and the others relax their vigilance. After all, Anika and the others were professional scouts in the Folded Sword Knight Regiment. They were the best nightingales, soldiers among soldiers, and would never let their guard down easily. The wind and snow seemed to have stopped for a while, and everyone felt a strange silence between them. They could not help but look at the silver-gray forest, and suddenly felt a little creeped out. "Did you hear something?" someone suddenly asked. The man was wearing leather armor and a dark brown robe. He was the only priest in the Cruz Knight Regiment. "What's the matter?" Aaliyah asked inexplicably. Listen, there's a sound in the wind." Little Pero put a finger to his lips with a serious look and gave the others a look. Everyone shut their mouths. The wind carried a low but sharp voice from number 1 high school. It sounded like a whistle. The sound came from afar and suddenly flew up from the forest with a crash. Everyone subconsciously held the hilt of their swords and looked up, and then they saw a spectacular scene. A gray, crystal-carved bird flew up from the canopy and into the sky. The crystal-clear bodies of these birds reflected the blue light of the great demonic tide in the sky in mid-air, flashing into one. They flapped their wings and flew high in the wind and snow, making a clear chirping sound, and in the blink of an eye, they passed over everyone's heads. Everyone present was stunned. They didn't expect that this seemingly lifeless place would have so many beautiful creatures hidden in it. It's the crystal swan. Oh my God, these are elemental creatures that are rare even in the mountain of ceasing storms, so many of them. Shido will go crazy when she sees them. A knight suddenly shouted. It was indeed a spectacle, but little Pero and Maynard reacted much more directly. The two pulled out their long swords and reminded the others, shouting, "Be careful, there's something in the forest." More than a dozen Crew's knights suddenly froze. After the crystal swan, there was the sound of trees falling down in the forest. Obviously, the crystal swans were startled by these things behind them. Everyone stared at the forest with wide eyes, trying to see what had attacked Anika and the others. But soon they held their breaths. A huge shadow gradually appeared behind the wind and snow, and the shadow gradually moved forward and became clear. Then they saw a wolf, a huge wolf as tall as a mountain. Its silver mane fluttered fiercely in the wind and snow. Its ears were long and pointed, a little different from ordinary winter wolves. However, one of its eyes was golden and the other was golden. Inside there was a light of wisdom and coldness. It looked down at everyone from above. The forest was like a meadow under its feet, and the Crew's knights present were like ants in the meadow. This is... Little Pero looked up and stared dumbfounded at the scene. Alpha Ekis. Maynard could not help but change her expression. Impossible, shouldn't it be sealed in? She suddenly realized something and subconsciously shut her mouth. What should we do? Everyone subconsciously turned their eyes to their only commander, Freya. But at this time, everyone noticed something very strange. Freya was gone. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Maynard's heart sank. But at this moment, no one understood that Freya was actually standing in the same place, and she was more surprised than everyone present, because what she saw was completely different from the others. At the moment when the wind blew, Freya first heard the howls of wolves in the forest. There was no crystal swan, nor was there Alpha Ekis. She only saw many pale eyes suddenly appear in the darkness, and those eyes gradually walked out of the shadows of the gray woodland, and then formed a huge snow-white wolf. Freya did not recognize these strange wolf-like creatures, but Brando might be able to call out their names here: the Pale Suns. One of the Alpha Ekis's favorite twilight species. Legend has it that they ran across the snowy plains, bringing storms wherever they passed. But their Alpha Lepizer died at the hands of the sky dragon, Chili, and they also fell in battle with the frost giant King Milos. Freya's eyes turned cold, and she immediately pulled out her long sword. But it was at this time that she discovered something very strange. The future Valkyrie found that the knight of crews around her, little Pero, Aaliyah, Rollo, and even Senior Maynard, were all standing on their horses with a blank look, as if they had not noticed the scene around them at all. Freya was shocked for a moment, and the death of Anika and Emerald instantly appeared in her mind, and she could not help but break out in a cold sweat. Senior Maynard? She hurriedly pushed Maynard, who was in a daze beside her, with her hand, and the latter swayed slightly, as if she had just woken up from a dream. She first saw Freya and was slightly startled, then frowned and asked with some confusion, "Freya, where have you been?" "Run, little Pero and the others are dead, I'll help you block Ekis." "Wait, what are you talking about? Everyone's still alive and well." Freya hurriedly interrupted her. "We've been surrounded, get ready to fight, Senior Maynard." "Fight?" Maynard was stunned, and then noticed the scene around her. She was stunned on her horse and could not help but blurt out, "The Pale Suns? How could it be them? Where's Ekis?" As soon as she finished speaking, a scream suddenly came from the forest. "The goddess of war. This is impossible. Why would the bloodline of the goddess of war still exist in this era?" The voice was so sharp that it did not seem to be any intelligent creature on the continent of Wond, as if two files were crisscrossing together, making a metallic noise. Freya and Maynard were startled and subconsciously looked in that direction, and they immediately saw a silver figure over there. That thing looked a little like a human because it had 4 limbs. It stood on 2 feet on the ground, and its hands were long and slender, reaching below its knees. Its entire body was covered in silver-white skin, but the most terrifying thing was that this thing had no eyes, nose, or ears. Its smooth face only had a black hole that could be called a mouth. And beside the human-like monster stood an old acquaintance of Freya and Maynard. Marquis Joachim? Freya looked at the man in disbelief and asked, "Aren't you dead?" Marquis Joachim smiled faintly. "I will not die so easily before I dedicate my life to the true God." "Freya, you and your lord should have arrived by now, right? In fact, we've been waiting for him here for a long time." Freya's heart thumped. "P.S. I wasn't feeling well 2 days ago, so I took a break. By the way, Amber is about to enter the magnificent main storyline, so I also need to organize my thoughts. I'll start updating today, but I'll have to slowly recover, so I won't make any promises. The only thing I can say is that everyone wait and see what's behind the continent of Wand. Also, the chapter, Eternity, involves a lot of content, so it might be a little long. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote for it at Chidian.com. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 773. With a thump in Freya's heart, there was a sharp sound, and the biting cold wind had brushed past her cheek, cutting off a few strands of hair around her ear and leaving a blood stain on her cheek. "What's that?" The future Valkyrie widened her eyes and turned her head subconsciously, just in time to see that thing piercing Aaliyah's neck behind her. It was a sharp icicle, and its thin ice blade pierced into the knight's neck from the left side and came out from the other side. The young knight of Cruz screamed, and blood suddenly gushed out as he fell from the horse's back. "Aaliyah." Freya couldn't believe what she saw. She looked back and saw the dense pale suns in the forest growling. The cold air gathered together with their silver hair, forming a rotating mass of air. In each of these air masses, a sharp icicle emerged from each of them. Every single icicle seemed to be ready to move. Freya sucked in a breath of cold air and immediately realized the danger they were in. She did not even have the time to wipe off the blood on her cheeks. She immediately said to Maynard behind her, "Senior, think of a way to wake the others up. We have to think of a way to break out." "What are you going to do?" Maynard saw Freya grabbing the reins with one hand and rushing outside, and her heart moved slightly. "That thing seems to know me. Brando also told me something similar. Although I don't know what the bloodline of the goddess of war is, maybe I can try to attract their attention." Freya had already pulled out the Lionheart sword. She loosened the reins, clamped her legs, and rushed out with the warhorse under her without hesitation. Her last few words came back almost intermittently in the wind. Maynard looked at Freya's back as she walked away in the wind and snow. She froze for a moment, then immediately turned back with a cold face and pulled the Cruz army priest who was in a daze beside her. Joachim stood at the edge of the forest and rubbed his hands. He squinted and saw Freya charging alone from the hillside, and his eyes lit up. The thick snow-white cloak behind the girl fluttered in the wind like a pair of white wings, and the scene was very much like the scene of the goddess of war's charge described in the war poem. He smiled slightly. "Your courage is commendable. I didn't expect Erwin to see such a scene today. Your Royal Highness is really amazing." But before he finished speaking, he was interrupted coldly by the monster on the side. "Why are you talking to them? Kill them before they wake up." The monster looked up, and although it had no eyes, it could still be seen that it had been looking in the direction of Freya. "I order you to kill that woman." "No, we should attack those knights before they wake up." Marquis Joachim was stunned for a moment, then immediately retorted. "Listen to my order. I order you to kill that woman." The monster replied stubbornly. "But..." Marquis Joachim still wanted to say something, but he was already sent flying by the silver monster. He crashed into a cedar tree and snow fell from the pine needles and covered his face. He looked up and saw that the monster had issued an order to the wolves. "Quick, kill that woman." Marquis Joachim's eyes could not help but show a resentful light. "Damn idiot." The white wolves let out a long howl, and in an instant, countless icicles whistled towards Freya. The girl from the countryside of Bucci hurriedly turned her horse's head and changed direction to the side of the forest. This way, most of the icicles fell behind her, and only a few hit her cloak, turning that beautiful cloak into a few pieces of rags. "Continue. Quickly continue." The silver monster could not help but scream angrily when it saw this scene. Another wave of icicles fell from the sky, and this time Freya could no longer take the easy way out. She looked up and saw the glittering icicles rushing towards her, and could not help but tremble nervously. Although she had seen similar scenes in Ampere Seal, this attack was directed at her alone. So this is how Brando felt when he was fighting alone. Freya could not help but think of this in her heart. This flash of thought calmed her down at the last moment. She gritted her teeth and swung the Lionheart sword in her hand forward with all her might. The wind from the sword moved forward in an arc, and a large number of icicles were turned into powder. However, dozens of icicles still passed through the line of defense, piercing the girl's shoulders and waist, and sent her flying from the horse's back. Freya rolled in the snow, leaving a trail of blood, but she immediately gritted her teeth and got up. She looked up, and a white line reflected in her vision. Under the command of the monster, the white wolves in the forest rushed out, and they seemed to have abandoned the Cruse people and rushed towards her. "Lady Martha, what is going on?" Freya could not help but feel a little puzzled. She did not recognize the monster at all, but it seemed to have identified her. The pale suns rushed out like a white wave, and she, who had fallen off the horse, could not escape at all. She saw that she was about to be surrounded, and at that moment she could not help but feel her hands and feet turn cold. Brando? But it was at this moment that Maynard finally shook the priest awake. "Quick, create a protective spell," she ordered the priest coldly. "What's wrong?" The priest's eyes were a little blurred, as if he had just woken up from a dream. But Maynard did not want to talk nonsense with him and pushed him back. "See for yourself," she said coldly. The priest looked up and noticed the current situation. "Martha above, pale suns, isn't this the descendant of the twilight?" He sucked in a breath of cold air and could not help but blurt out. But when he turned his head, he immediately noticed Freya's situation and was shocked. He hurriedly shouted at the top of his lungs, "Hold on, Miss Freya." At this moment, there was not enough time for him to chant the spell. The priest only hesitated for a moment, then pulled the flame emblem from his robe and threw it in the direction of Freya. As everyone knew, the emblem worn by the priests of the Holy Cathedral of Fire was enchanted with powerful spells. In the blink of an eye, a crimson light fell from the sky, forming a protective shield that enveloped the girl from the countryside of Bucci. The leading snow wolf crashed into the shield, and its huge head was completely broken with a crack. The pale red shield shook violently, but the brain matter of the pale sun was also smeared on the pale red light wall. Freya was startled, but then she breathed a sigh of relief. She turned her head and gave the priest a grateful look. At this time, Maynard woke the others up one by one. Cruse's knights seemed to have just realized their situation, and were naturally grateful to Freya for saving their lives. But unfortunately, although their commander was temporarily saved by the protective spell, he was still trapped in a tight encirclement. Everyone understood this. "We have to find a way to cut into the wolves, separate them from Miss Freya, and rescue her." Little Pero saw this scene and replied. But he frowned again, showing a worried look. "But the wolves are too thick, I don't know if we can do it." "We can only try, Miss Maynard. Can you take the injured Aaliyah away from here so that we can give it a try?" The other knight echoed in unison. But at this time, the priest of Cruse, who was responded with gratitude by Freya, turned around. "I suggest you don't do this, I have a better plan." "Mr. Priest, what do you have in mind?" Little Pero was slightly startled and looked at him. "Leave it to me here." The priest glanced at everyone and replied, "I will separate the wolves from Miss Freya. There are only a few minutes, you have to seize the opportunity." "What do you want to do?" "I will pray to the path of the golden flames, the flames will burn away all evil, and the Flame King will be with me." The priest smiled at everyone. "Don't worry, the pale suns were destroyed by the gods of order in the legends, and it will be the same today, Mr. Priest." The priest waved his hand. "Go, remember that you are the pride of the people of Cruse, don't let the lady wait too long." With that, he dismounted, gently touched his robe with his hand when he landed, and then walked in the direction of the wolves. Maynard looked back at this guy and couldn't help but shout, "Wait! What is the lady's order?" "What is your name?" Maynard asked with a frown. "I am an attendant of the Golden Flames, my name is not important to me, but you can call me Million." The priest replied with a smile. Maynard nodded silently. "I will remember you, Million." With that, she turned her horse's head, and all the other knight of Cruse looked at her. But the female knight did not say a word. The cold wind was biting cold, but there was a strange meaning in the wind that was as cold as a knife. The knight formed a charging formation. Million faced the direction of the wolves, took a small breath, and then raised his hand. A golden flame separated the gloomy clouds above the sky, fell from the sky, and swallowed his body in the blink of an eye. At that moment, the priest of Cruse shouted, "Sage, today I will fulfill the promise engraved in the golden flame to you. The descendant of the eagle will never bow to injustice and evil. Please give me your authority, let me do your will." and sweep away all the evil in this world. The pillar of fire became bright in an instant, almost completely enveloping the priest, and the golden light illuminated the whole forest. It lit up the eyes of Maynard, Cruz, and the other knight of Cruz, and also made Freya, who was fighting the white wolf, look back in shock. Everyone saw this scene. Milion raised his hand high, his body was almost completely burned out, and his whole person turned into a flame. This was because the unbearable divine power had completely destroyed the mortal body, but at the last moment of his existence in this world, he raised his right hand and slashed from top to bottom. At that moment, in the dark night sky, a giant golden flame sword hundreds of meters long appeared above the forest, and the blade fell from the sky, like a meteor falling heavily among the wolves. The moment the blade landed, a bright explosion engulfed countless white wolves in an instant, and the brilliant sparks were Milion's judgment on the ground under the pretense of the authority of the golden flame. The flames burned fiercely, and the wolf pack had been divided into two. Maynard turned her head, the golden flame still illuminated her cheeks, but the female knight said nothing, just loosened the reins. Little Pero, take Aaliyah and leave. The rest of you follow me. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 774. Golden flames exploded in the sky and spread in all directions of the gloomy sky like a ring. The wind rolled up the snowflakes. Such bad weather was just like the end of the world predicted by the Myurnas, but the dazzling flash still lit up the sky for dozens of miles, and under the layers of clouds, it was a vast expanse of white. My lord. Medisha turned her head from that direction, and the light reflected on her cheeks, making her cheeks pale. Let's split up. This is the high-level magic of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. It seems that Freya is in trouble. Brando also looked up at her and replied. Veronica nodded in agreement. Let Brun take everyone else over. On our side, you stay behind. Teacher, stay behind. I still have my 3 attendants, Scarlet plus Alaz and Sheeta. These highest combat powers are enough to deal with that old fox Arek. As for Prince Leneret, he's with us. Veronica glanced at him and answered first. Brando understood. No matter how bold Cruz's people were, they would not let their future crown prince take unnecessary risks. However, Freya must be in trouble. This was obvious, but the Valkyrie had to go her own way after all. He couldn't always protect her. That would eventually hurt her. This world was not as peaceful as the girl expected. She had to pay for what she wanted, otherwise it would be unfair to others. Brando lowered his eyelids gently, not to mention Maynard was also by her side. There shouldn't be any problems, he could only think so. Then it's decided. Huruz, you're with us too. Brando grabbed the reins again, and the little prince beside Prince Leneret quickly nodded to him. He turned his head. Miss Shido? I'm with you too. The scholar looked at Veronica, then at the count, and answered them. Well, Mr. Brund, do you have any questions? As long as there is a horse dash, the young knight with golden hair replied proudly from atop his Pegasus. He checked his sword and tied a dagger to his shoulder armor like all knight of the folded sword. This tradition is said to have originated from the legend that Gretel once fought with the king of the spirits in the Black Tomb and fought to the death with the dagger after his sword was broken. The cold wind made his cloak flutter. These summoned heavenly horses will last until tomorrow morning. You must pay attention. Medisha replied. That's enough. Brun saluted Veronica and then nodded to Brando. He turned his horse around and whistled. The whistle spread far and wide in the wind and snow, like a bird chirping through the canopy, bringing the whole forest to life. The dark procession turned in the heavy snow, and the Cruz knight left the main road in a mighty manner. Many of the men and horses began to move in the direction of the forest a few miles away. As far as the eye could see, the snow-white area was filled with dense black dots, but after a while they connected into a small area, leaving only a thin line on the horizon. Brun turned his head back for the last time and signaled to them with his sword that flashed with a cold light. He raised his sword, indicating a good omen of success. Don't worry, they're all excellent children. Veronica said, Miss Freya will be fine. I hope so, I believe in her. Now it's our turn. The dragon told us there's a shortcut and we're already on it? That road is not easy to walk, it has to pass through the ice gap under the glacier, and only the dragon has walked that road. Passers-by may not be able to walk where the dragon has walked. There are dangers lurking under the ice, and there are many creatures from the mythological era. But Grand Duke Arek is heading for the Holy Cathedral of the Hibernator, and we must catch up with him before that. Brando, tell me, what is Arek trying to do? He has already gotten the heart of the dragon, so why didn't he choose to leave here? but continued to move deeper into the glacier? Veronica narrowed her eyes. Brando did not answer immediately. He would rather believe that Erek might want to kill two birds with one stone, using the power of the demon to open the ancient seal in the holy cathedral of the Hibernator and release the descendants of the Twilight sealed underground. But he always felt that things were not so simple. Erek would not be unaware that he would anger the guardian of this place, Sheeta. Intuition told him that Erek might have already arranged a series of plans for this trip. But to expose the other party's trick, Brando felt that he first had to find out what was really hidden in the center of the stained frost forest maze. In response to Veronica's question, he just shook his head. We'll know soon enough. Brando Shido is very familiar with such glaciers. She has a wealth of geographical knowledge, she may be able to help you. No need, I'm also very familiar with this place. What I need is a guide with a wealth of survival skills, not a scholar. Peya was such an excellent guide, but the hunter girl had become a little depressed since witnessing her companions in the town being killed by Erek. She could not ride a horse, so she could only ride with Scarlet. She wrapped her arms around the waist of the mountain girl woodenly and said nothing. The sky soon darkened, or it was darker than before. The night on the snowy plains was pitch black without a trace of light, and no team could continue their journey in such an environment. Therefore, everyone had to stop and camp in the lee of the wind. The direction of the forest was quiet, and there was no news at all. Just like that, the night passed. In the early hours of the morning, Brando finally found the shortcut that Sheeta had mentioned that led to the ice gap. He finally knew why this road was called a shortcut, because it crossed the entire glacier blocking the north side. Brando remembered that there was such a passage in the game, which was called the Blade's Edge by the players. Because crossing it was as dangerous as crossing a blade, no one would choose this road if they were not in a hurry. The next few hours were spent in darkness and cold. The team sometimes moved along a long and narrow glacier, and in the blink of an eye, they appeared over the abyss. The terrain under the glacier was intricate, which was an eye-opener for everyone. But the one who gained the most was obviously the scholar. As soon as she had time to stop, Brando saw her take out a small book from her backpack and write and draw. The whole morning was peaceful. Two blind ice demons lurking in the ice gap wanted to attack the team, but Mephistopheles found them in advance and killed them with a sword. They should be the bosses in the nearby area. Brando found that the Ash Sword Saint could also gain a lot of experience by killing monsters, but unfortunately nothing dropped. There was no concept of time in the dark underground. Almost 2 or 3 hours after Mephistopheles killed the ice demons, the team came to a natural open place. At this time, Shido and Haruz, who were slightly weaker, were almost exhausted. Brando put the torch between two icicles and then asked everyone to stop to rest and replenish their strength. At this time, Alaz came to him. The little female dragon pulled Brando out of the crowd and pulled him aside. Her golden eyes flashed with a dangerous light. She stretched out her claws to Brando and whispered, "Brando, someone is following us, did you notice?" Brando was slightly startled, and then a serious look appeared on his face. "I vaguely felt it, I thought it was an illusion." "Why, can you feel it?" Brando was not lying. Because of some experience in the game, he trusted his intuition very much, which was why he asked the team to stop. These glaciers and the cracks below were caused by the war tens of thousands of years ago. No one knew what would be under the ice. According to the strength calculation in the game, it was not impossible for a boss above level 60 to appear. In terms of combat power, it was equivalent to the existence of the Peak of the Law. Even though Brendel's teacher had one foot in the ultimate realm, but fighting in this kind of environment, strength sometimes did not mean anything. Brendel did not forget how Andesha failed miserably in such an easy task. "Huh. You can actually detect it?" "I asked your Ash Sword Saint teacher, he didn't seem to feel it at all." "How did you feel it?" Alaz was a little curious. "It's just my intuition, it has nothing to do with strength." But Brando frowned. He faintly felt that it might have something to do with dark perception. Unfortunately, he still could not wear the Gemini ring, otherwise he would be able to sense the lurker more clearly. Your intuition is quite strange. To be honest, I just have some intuition that something is following us. Didn't you notice that there are too few monsters under the glacier, much fewer than the number of monsters we encountered in Sheeta's lair? You judged based on this? Brando took a closer look at the little female dragon, somewhat surprised by her attentiveness. More or less. What about Sheeta? He's the local snake here, and it's said that he's passed through this ice gap several times. What did he say? What's down here? He said he didn't know. Do you think he doesn't know? You mean he's lying to me? Alaz was a little annoyed. He wouldn't dare lie to me. But have you ever thought about who asked it to guard here? He never said the other party's name. Alas, Sheeta just looks like an idiot on the surface. The little female dragon stopped talking. She looked surprised, which then turned into anger. Damn it, he dares to lie to me, I'll go find him. Wait, don't go. Brando grabbed her arm and tried to pull the little female dragon back, but he did not expect Alas to be so strong that she almost sent him flying. Brando managed to steady himself and shouted, Alas, wait a minute, I don't think Sheeta lied to you. What do you mean, Brando? Why do I not understand what you're saying more and more? Alas turned back and replied in a huff. I mean, Sheeta may not know the other party's name himself. Impossible, Alas immediately retorted. You said it yourself, Sheeta is not really an idiot. I know him very well. He may be a little stupid sometimes, but he is a smart guy. I mean, do you know those existences? Brando lowered his voice and replied, the Guardians. Ah, Alas was suddenly speechless. She stared at Brando dumbfounded. How do you know all this? No, wait. Author's note, kakaka when someone come and kill me, it's so annoying. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 775. The crisscrossing ice crevices were deep and winding, like the blood vessels of a giant beast intricately distributed under the glacier, but there was no blood pulsing inside, only darkness and silence. Water droplets dripped down from the several-foot-long icicles, occasionally making a tinkling sound, breaking the silence and solitude. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke into the dreamlike silence. The footsteps seemed to be being chased but also seemed to be chasing something. It passed through one ice cave after another, and then a young man came into view. The young man's skin was dark and his clothes were tattered from head to toe. There were even bloodstains on them, but under his long messy hair was a pair of eyes that emitted a dazzling brilliance. Yaruta panted heavily. Since entering the stained frost forest, the sword wounds on his body had not healed, the high fever continued, and the surrounding scenery was sometimes clear and sometimes blurry to him. When his condition worsened, the ice-blue pillar even produced double images in his eyes, but in the dark, he could always see the figure that was sometimes far and sometimes close. It seemed to be a person, but there was always only a back view. For 2 weeks, it had been floating and always walking in front of him. It was as if there was a kind of magic urging him to cross the forest and the glacier, always following behind it all the way here. But Yaruta already had a splitting headache and his mind was groggy. He could not remember much, but he at least remembered his father, his sister, and the hunter who died outside the stained frost forest that day, when he was curled up under the carriage, feeling the wound on his chest and abdomen bleeding, his body getting weaker and weaker, light as a feather, as if he was about to lose all consciousness. A voice entered his mind, and he only remembered that it was a neutral, emotionless voice. Do you want to live, mortal? Stand up if you want to live. Save me, save me. Yaruta remembered groaning in a daze, but he did not get an answer. He coughed hard. You want to save me? I can't save you, but someone can. Yaruta opened his mouth wide, feeling that he could barely breathe, let alone speak. But soon after, a cold aura spread out from his chest, allowing him to regain some of his consciousness. You must come to me, you can only save yourself if you obey my orders. During this period I will temporarily protect you, but you don't have much time. Yaruta's body was injected with a trace of power. He barely opened his eyes and saw a huge, pale blue phantom standing in front of him. It was like a ghost, but he did not have the strength to look up at the other party's face. He could only see the loose robe. Why did you save me? Where are the others? You and your sister might be related to the 12th legacy. But that's not the point. You need my help and I need yours. Sister? Yaruta heard this word and became excited. Sister is still alive? She won't die. Someone will save her. What about me? Can I still see her? Don't worry, you will eventually reunite with your sister as long as you listen to my orders. But who are you? I'm Crystal. You mortals like to call me that, but I prefer my original name, Lucas. However, what you saw was not me but a message. It's hard for me to explain it to you, but you just need to understand that you need my help and I need yours. You need my help? Yes, I need you to come to my side. Side, aren't you right in front of me? The blue figure did not answer but looked down at him and then slowly turned around. Yaruta felt that his body seemed to be recovering faster, and there was always a voice in his heart calling to him. Somehow he followed in a daze. They walked into the forest one after the other as if no one noticed them. He passed by the Black Knight under a wreck who was unaware. Then they passed through the forest, through the valley, through the snowfield and the glacier, without encountering a single monster. Every night after that, the blue figure would reappear, walking unhurriedly in front of him, the distance erratic. Day after day, Yeruta forgot his surroundings, even forgot hunger and cold and forgot time. But gradually the other party walked faster and faster, leaving him less and less time. Yeruta, you have to accelerate faster. You don't have much time left. The teenager also gradually realized. His body was getting heavier and heavier, and the sword wound that had not healed was like a painful brand that constantly tugged at his nerves. His steps were no longer as brisk as when he first stepped into the forest. His mind was sometimes clear and sometimes muddy. Most of the time, Yeruta could only maintain a limited amount of calmness. His vision was getting narrower and narrower in front of him, and the surrounding scenery was getting darker and darker. Finally, there was a moment. He saw the blue figure in front of him disappear. His feet went soft and he suddenly slid down the side of the ice. There was a series of sounds of broken ice rolling down in the darkness, and then it quickly returned to silence. Wake up, there's not much time left for you. Wake up, Dash, I need your help. Brando suddenly opened his eyes, and his pale forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. What time, Dash? He looked up in confusion. The ice above his head was always a magnificent blue, and the whistling sound known as Jupiter's whispers echoed in the distance. It was the sound of a cold current passing through an isthmus in the north. At one end of the isthmus, there was a huge glacier connected to the ground. The sound had been going on for years, but it was still far away. It often made people mistakenly think that there was a howling monster locked in the underground abyss. Brendel stared suspiciously into the depths of the cave for a while. His eyes were as deep as a puzzle that could not be solved. He gathered the blanket that did not seem to be too tight, and only then did he realize that he had a dream. He had a strange dream. In the dream, many people passed through a shining snowfield. They wore strange clothes, black and white robes, and rode wingless dragons. Gradually, black, huge, obelisk-like buildings appeared around them. The buildings emitted a strange metallic luster and were covered with a spiderweb-like crystal grid. Brando recognized that those were the remains of Milos. It was said that the closer to the center of the glacier, the more such remains there were. Brando saw such a scene in the dream. He saw those people pass through these ancient ruins and come to the edge of a huge rift. There they held a grand sacrificial ceremony, pushed the slaves down the valley, and then threw a huge shining box into the abyss. Time passed slowly in the glacier. He saw those people then settle down and become neighbors with the cavemen on the ice. But suddenly there was a dispute among them, and then there was a split, a war, and they were divided into two factions from the inside. The losing side continued north while the rest stayed. The good times were gone. Many old people froze to death on the glacier. The young people tried to leave the glacier for the forest, but they fell one by one on the migration path. Only a few people were left. The person he dreamed of watched on the glacier day after day, watching his people fall one by one. Death was like a plague and finally fell on him. Brando vaguely remembered the last sunrise he saw in the dream. The sun rose from the west, red and huge, and the world became blood red as if it was a sign of something. Brando looked away. The cave was quiet and everyone was asleep. There was a bright light in the far end of Brando's vision. It was a bonfire. It should be the latter half of the night, so the ones keeping watch at the bonfire were Medisha and the Shire. He could even occasionally hear the low voices of conversation coming from there. But Brando did not intend to get up. He leaned quietly in the darkness alone. He did not understand the meaning of his strange dream. When he completely calmed down, he had realized that the scene he saw in the dream might be what the Myrna people saw with their own eyes. And those people he saw were probably the Myrna people who crossed the glacier. The Myrna people were driven away by Gretel at the end of the War of the Holy Saints. The time was about chaos. 1024, which was before the year of the Golden Hoof, and earlier than the Age of Runes and Swords. Not long after that, the last great demonic wave happened. According to the records in the scriptures, the population of the whole continent was reduced by almost 1/3 in that disaster. That was the worst disaster Wand had experienced after the War of the Holy Saints. He suddenly remembered the red and huge sun he saw in his dream, and remembered a passage in the Black Prophecy. Blood fell from the sky and the disaster stopped from the west to the east. Wasn't that the description of the last great demonic wave? But why would he suddenly dream of a scene that happened 1,000 years ago? Brando himself did not understand. He only felt that it was indescribably strange. He also remembered the box that looked like a golden ark that the Myrna people threw into the abyss in his dream. He faintly felt that his dream might have something to do with the box. But as for what was in the box, he knew nothing. There were no records of it in history. Brando sighed softly. The feeling of being spied on rose in his heart again. He subconsciously turned his head. The surroundings were silent. The ice cave was like the body of a sleeping beast. It was sometimes so quiet that it made one's heart palpitate. But Brando looked around vigilantly. He clearly felt that there was always a pair of eyes hidden in the darkness. Brando, that can't be the protector dash. He could not help but turn his head and look in the direction where Alaz was sleeping. He remembered the conversation between the two in the afternoon. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 776. Since the Battle of Babel Fortress, the legend of the Guardians had spread. Legend had it that the Guardians had always been in a secret place that no one knew of, guarding the knowledge of the gods from the ancient times. They were a special group of golden people, created by the Dragon of Fury, Alphonse. But when the dispute restarted, they would return to the earth. But in fact, there is no such thing. Arek smiled coldly. That is just a legend made up by the mortals to comfort themselves. The real guardians have never existed. The knowledge of the mortals is lost, scattered on the earth. They're sad fragments of knowledge about magic and order. After saying this, he raised his head. Above the towering ice stairs there was a huge stone door. There were no decorations on the stone door, and it looked like an ancient fortress. Arek stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment, then slowly went up with his entourage. The icy wind whistled, and the entrance of the holy cathedral of the hibernators stood in front of them. It seems that the dragon has been confused by us. Devard could not help but say a witty remark. Arek glanced at him and he felt a chill in his heart. In order to fight against the twilight, the gods created the dragons to manage the world on their behalf. The platinum dragon Bahamut, the war dragon Tiamat, the raging dragon Alphonse, the knowledge dragon Crystal, the elemental dragon Blazing, the calamity dragon Azure. The dragons also created the first generation of warriors. The people of blood and fire, the golden generation. Legend has it that the golden generation each had their own duties. The dragons mastered the law, the Myrnas mastered power, the witches mastered magic, and the creations of the knowledge dragon and the raging dragon never appeared on the earth. This is the origin of this legend, but in fact this is just an agreement left by the raging dragon Alphonse, Odin, and the Azure Knight. Odin? Devard was slightly startled. Sir, you mean the darkness dragon? What did they agree on? Arek nodded. That's our biggest enemy. The funny thing is that those mortals gave him a nondescript name. Odin was never a dragon and he doesn't need to exist as a dragon. No one knows what they agreed on, but one thing is for sure, it has something to do with the silver generation that appeared later. Odin has always been waiting for an opportunity, especially since the Ring of the World split. There are voices within the gods who doubt that the creation of the golden folk was a mistake. After that, the subsequent legend was released by the Buga people, but its authenticity is doubtful. This statement is likely just an excuse made up by the Buga wizards to maintain the legitimacy of the sacred covenant. After Arek said this, he suddenly fell silent. What really remains in this glacier isn't the guardian race at all. It's very likely that it's just a remnant will of Milos. The will of a god? Arek raised his head and saw the heavy stone door slowly opening in front of him, but the gray color in his eyes remained unchanged. He smiled with some disdain. Don't worry, it's just a trick. There's nothing to fear from a god who has lost his throne in the sky. The will of Milos is here, which means that the legend is true, and we will soon have the honor of witnessing it all. He turned his head, his face full of twisted fanaticism. The Twilight Dragon may never have been defeated. Brando suddenly heard a rustling sound coming from the darkness. The sound came from far to near, like something crawling on the ground. He became alert, grabbed the hilt of the Howran Gaia beside him, and narrowed his eyes to look in that direction in the darkness. After only a short while he saw the outline of a person over there. Brando was slightly startled because he saw the huntress. What is she doing at this time? A thought flashed through his mind, wondering if this girl was a spy left behind by Arek, but then he shook his head. There seemed to be no point for Arek to leave this spy behind. Just as he was in a daze, Peya had come to his side. The huntress didn't seem to realize that Brando had woken up. She quietly came to the Count's side and exhaled softly as if she was nervous, and then dared to look at Brando cautiously. But it was this glance that made her freeze there. She saw Brando's bright eyes in the darkness, looking at her in confusion. Ah! Peya almost shivered in fright and froze in place for a moment. Peya? What are you doing? Brando asked calmly. He had reason to be calm because the huntress posed no threat to him. The huntress had a complicated look in her eyes. She bit her lower lip, and it was difficult to see her face in the darkness, but there was a wild and determined look in her dark eyes. She suddenly lowered her head and looked at Brando with her dark eyes, and then moved closer to Brando with some fear. Her whole body snuggled down and she gently rested her head on his neck. Brando was stunned for a moment. He felt Peya's body trembling slightly in his arms and his heart pounding. But he didn't understand what she meant by this action. What are you doing, Peya? Brando was completely shocked by the huntress's actions and completely lost his previous calmness. He hurriedly pressed her shoulders and pushed her away a little, staring carefully into her eyes. He thought that the huntress was possessed. After all, there were often some ghosts in the dark underground that could control people's hearts. But the huntress's eyes were very clear, and there was just a hint of embarrassment and shyness in her eyes as she looked at him. Brando suddenly understood something. He put her back a little and then sat up. Peya, do you want to beg me to save your brother? The huntress grabbed her collar with one hand, and the eyelashes of her sincere eyes under her thick black hair drooped down. She trembled slightly and said hoarsely, My lord, I dreamed of Yaruta. A nightmare? Peya nodded in fear. I dreamed that he was unconscious in an ice cave with a lot of corpses around him. She looked up, her eyes full of fear. Brando breathed a sigh of relief and comforted her. It was just a dream, Peya. Erek didn't kill your brother, you saw it. No, the huntress shook her head vigorously. I saw it, he's not far from here. I also heard that voice, he told us to hurry and save him. My lord, But Brando was slightly startled. He suddenly remembered his dream and could not help but frown. You heard that voice too? He saw the huntress looking at him puzzledly and explained, The voice in your dream, what kind of voice was it? I don't know, the huntress shook her head vigorously. It was like in my heart, it made me feel very warm and made me want to believe in him. Brando had confirmed by this time that it was the same voice that appeared in his dream, and he frowned, feeling that the situation was a little unusual. Obviously, there was something under the glacier that wanted him to know something or take him somewhere, and its power might not be as strong as imagined, so it had to resort to such means. It was not that he had never encountered such a thing in the game, it was just that he did not feel the same way in the real world. He thought for a moment and asked, Peya, your dream, do you remember that place? I remember it was in a deep valley not far from here. The huntress hurriedly replied. She looked up at him pitifully and hopefully. I see, go and get the others up. Brando nodded. He took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. Although it was not yet dawn, it was a matter of life and death, not to mention why Yaruta would appear here, which made him very curious. Brando already had some guesses in his heart. Peya's dark eyes seemed to be lit up for a moment, and she looked up gratefully, but then she felt that something was wrong. The huntress lowered her head humbly again and knelt in front of Brando, holding Brando's right hand in both hands and kissing his fingers. This kiss had nothing to do with the feelings between a man and a woman, but the servant's humble gratitude to the master. The huntress looked up at him cautiously and asked, Sir Knight, is your manor still short of a hunter? My father was once the most outstanding hunter in this area, and I learned from my father to be a good hunter since I was a child, and I believe that I am not inferior to even the most seasoned hunters. Peya? Brando was a little embarrassed. I didn't help you because of that. No. I will definitely satisfy you as long as you say the word. Peya is willing to do anything for you. The huntress knelt down before him and pleaded in a low voice. It had to be said that the huntress had the capital to say such words. Except for her rough skin and dirty long black hair, her beauty was not inferior to any woman Brando had seen in any region. What's more, Peya had a wild beauty, which seemed to be hidden in her powerful figure, ready to burst out with her movements at any time, full of tension. For such a stubborn woman to say such pleading words, Brando saw the huntress kneeling beside him, and although he felt very awkward, it was not impossible to say that he was not moved at all. He took a deep breath and managed to calm himself down. He shook his head and said, Peya, you are our guide. I said that I would save your brother if I had the chance. This is my promise. Don't let me make a mistake, okay? The huntress was slightly startled. She stepped back a little in confusion, but looked at Brando in a daze, as if she did not understand why Brando would say that. It was difficult for Brando to explain to her how he was different from other nobles, so he could only smile at her awkwardly. This smile was different from the one Peya had seen on any other nobles. It was either contemptuous or greedy and was unsettling. Go, Brando replied. The scene before was a little too explosive and he was a normal man. He suddenly felt a little envious of those damned nobles. This envy turned into a kind of resentment and in the end, it turned into a commanding tone. Hurry up and wake everyone up. Tell everyone to get ready to depart. Your brother is still unconscious. Have you forgotten? Thank you, Lord Knight. Brando watched Peya retreat and breathed a sigh of relief. But he still had another problem to solve. He turned his head and said to the darkness, Have you seen enough, Miss Shido? If you are well rested, we will be ready to set off. He had thought that this sentence would scare off the scholar who had been quietly peeping, but he did not expect Shido to be much more generous than he had imagined. She smiled politely at him from over there. Mr. Brando, they say that you are the model of the ancient nobles, but in terms of romance, you are far from it. In the face of a noble and beautiful lady who is willing to sacrifice herself, you have chosen to refuse. How disappointing. Brando almost spat out the water in his mouth. But the poet added, But I admire it very much, Count. You have shown me a noble character, and its name is refusing to take advantage of others. The scholar smiled and nodded to Brando before retreating into her tent. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 777. Just as Brando and his party began to move on the other side, Freya was struggling to move forward in the silver-gray forest. They had been with Brun's men for a day and a half, but this did not change their situation at all. There were more and more pale suns in the forest, and in order to deal with these terrible beasts, they had to flee northwest along the forest. In the early hours of the morning, they hastily ate some hard-to-swallow dry food, and the scout cavalry found traces of white wolves on the outskirts of the forest, and the team had to set off again. Marquis Yoakum and the monster seemed to have great interest in them, and had been chasing after them. But the most terrible thing was still the monster. Freya checked Aaliyah and another knight on the stretcher, who were feverish, and the wound on Aaliyah's neck had begun to turn black. The icicles fired by the white wolves seemed to carry some kind of curse that could slow down the healing time of the wound and accelerate the decay. Freya herself had many such wounds and she was well aware of it, but she did not show the constant pain on her face. The other knight, on the other hand, seemed to be completely dehydrated. He had just blocked the silver monster, and it was as if all his flesh and blood had been sucked out of his body. Freya saw with her own eyes that the humanoid silver monster was besieged by 7 or 8 gold-ranked cruise knights. It was wounded all over, but it suddenly pounced on one of them, and after draining the man's flesh and blood, the wounds all over its body healed as if nothing had happened. She had never heard of such a terrible ability, not even vampires. At that time, almost all the knights in that battle were left there, and only the one in front of her managed to escape. Later, in order to block the monster, the whole team left behind more than a dozen knights, and even the female knight named Rogi died in that battle. She could not help but glance at little Pero, and she only later learned that the female knight was his fiancée. The wind has stopped. Little Pero's face was almost expressionless, but he looked at the canopy that gradually stopped shaking and said this. This was almost the only good news in the past few hours. However, the bad news was that when there was no wind or snow, the distance in the forest would be further and the smell would linger for a longer time. But where exactly should we go? It's already impossible for us to meet up with the Count and the Legion commander. The other party clearly doesn't intend to give way to us. Brun stared at the crude map drawn last night on the ground and said. In just 2 days his cheeks had lost weight and deep dark circles had appeared under his eyes. Continue heading north, Maynard replied. They don't want us to meet up with them, so we'll do as they wish. The others nodded. Yoakum should be hoping to weaken the forces around Veronica and Brando, but everyone present at the moment knew how strong the forces around Brando were. In fact, they were not lacking at all. It seemed that the main force of the Folded Sword Knight Regiment was here, but the other side was stronger. Freya, Brund, Maynard, and little Pero were very clear in their hearts. Brando asked Brun to lead all the Folded Sword Knight Regiment away, not necessarily to numb the other party. In that case it seemed that they could beat them at their own game. Marquis Yoakum is fine, but that monster seems to have gone crazy. I don't know what it's trying to do. Brund glanced at Aaliyah, who was lying on the stretcher, and could not help but say with some annoyance. But everyone present turned their eyes to Freya, and Freya herself frowned. Brun did not know, but the people who were with her first knew in their hearts that the silver monster was obviously coming for their commander. It was just that no one knew what the so-called bloodline of the goddess of war was. Senior Maynard, do you know something? Freya turned her head and whispered to the female knight beside her. Maynard shook her head. I've never heard of the legend of the goddess of war, but I only know that this bloodline does seem to have something to do with you. Brando should have mentioned it to you, but like him, I don't know why that monster knows all this. I don't know what it has to do with you. This was not the first time Maynard had answered like this, and Freya could not help but sigh anxiously. She opened her backpack and glanced at the slate lying quietly inside. Brando once said that this slate would answer her questions, but so far she had found nothing. Maynard saw that Freya was lost in thought, and she turned to the others and said, It's almost dawn, and since the movements of those white beasts have been found on the periphery, it means that they will soon appear in this area. We'll continue to circle northwest along the forest and buy time for our lord and your lord commander. Does anyone have any other opinions? The others did not speak. In the previous 2 days of battle, Maynard had shown extraordinary command, and although it was not enough to make these proud young people admire her, she had at least won their recognition. I have a question. Only little Pero thought for a moment and replied, What if the silver monster comes after us again? This question made the atmosphere in the camp drop to freezing point. Everyone still remembered the battle last night with lingering fear. Nearly 1/5 of the knights of the Folded Sword Knight Regiment had died, just to block that terrible monster. Maynard also seemed a little hesitant. Sometimes plans were very pale in the face of absolute strength. The silver monster was at least above the elemental activation level, and it was not something that they, as gold ranks, could stop. Let's take it one step at a time. She could only answer so. But it was at this moment that there was a sudden commotion outside the camp. Stag! Stag! Everyone was screaming. What's going on? The young knight present stood up at the same time, with one hand on his sword, and looked out. They saw Freya stand up as if she had been electrocuted. The future Valkyrie looked up and saw a blue stag standing proudly in the forest not far from the camp. This scene seemed to pull her thoughts back to that night in the year of flowers and summer leaves in an instant. The blue stag looked at the knight in the camp and twisted its beautiful neck, as if to signal everyone. It turned around and then slowly walked into the forest. Quick, follow it. Freya seemed to wake up from a dream and hurriedly said to everyone. Wait. Little Pero looked at the forest and frowned. Sir Commander, that's the holy cathedral of the Hibernator. The heavy stone door slowly opened, revealing a dark and deep space behind it. It was like an obsidian passage. The cross-section of the whole passage was trapezoidal, and the surface was covered with bright red polylines. A thin layer of fog was deposited on the ground, but as the stone door opened, the cold wind that rushed in from the outside had already blown it away, revealing the dark ground below. Erek walked up the frosty stairs, and his eyes first fell on the skeletons that were scattered on both sides of the passage. These skeletons were clearly divided into 2 categories. On one side there were tall humanoid creatures, still wearing the armor they had when they were alive. The armor was simple in shape and covered with patterns that were incompatible with the aesthetic style of this era. Most of the weapons used by these skeletons were heavy broadswords or battle axes. These dusty weapons still had remnants of the aura from the previous era, heavy and vigorous, as if each of them was a divine weapon, but the magic on them had long since fallen apart with the passing of their owners. However, there were still some weapons that were luckily preserved. Erek passed by these corpses and casually picked up a sword. He injected a little bit of magic power and chanted a strange word. The sword became bright and was surrounded by lightning. The Duke casually threw the sword and it shot out like a bolt of lightning. It hit the wall on one side of the passage with a loud bang, and then bounced to the side, drawing a beautiful blue and white line. It hit the floor again, leaving behind a trail of sparks, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. Devard came closer to take a look, only to find that the place where the combat sword hit the wall did not even leave the slightest scratch. He could not help but change his expression and asked, "What is this temple built with?" "The previous blow with the weapon was almost equivalent to my full blow. This wall? This is not a building, Devard," Erek replied. "Milos fell here." "Who built these buildings? The Myrnas or the Cruz people? They can't make it." "No, Milos is the follower of the Dragon of Fury, Alphonse. This is his body." "Ah? Don't be surprised. Why do the gods shape their images according to human imagination? The myths of the Myrnas are barely reliable. The Cruz people have never experienced those tragic ancient wars. What do they know? They dare to claim to be orthodox in front of all for one? They are just some clowns who took the opportunity to steal the throne. Odin doesn't care about them, but we are not such fools. Erek's words echoed in the passage. He slowly passed by the skeletons of another kind of creature, which were obviously wolves. But their skeletons were much larger than their descendants living on the earth now. The skeletons of these wolves were like the skeletons of giant dragons, with thick forelimbs, two particularly sharp tusks, and oddly shaped bone plates and long horns on their heads. These were the so-called ancient species, the first generation of Ekis descendants. Erek admired these skeletons as if he was admiring a work of art, but he did not have any other intentions. He just walked through them. The group moved slowly along the passage, followed by the Knight of the Order of the Dead of All for One. Erek looked for a while, then turned back to the Wizards of All for One and asked, "You guys unearthed those things in the periphery?" "Yes." The wizard replied respectfully, "This is exactly the same as what is recorded in the Dark Prophecy, and also in line with some of our books. Milos fought a long battle here with Ekis, and at the same time, the Lord's Second Legion participated in the battle." "The Second Legion? Is it the Crystal Cluster?" "No, the Crystal Cluster came from the Seventh Legion. They attacked the Wings of Earth on the extreme plane, so it's impossible for them to appear in the inner world on a large scale. It should be the No Race here." "No Race, Ekis, the name of the abyss. I'm getting more and more curious." Erek could not help but squint his eyes, and faint stripes began to appear on his pale face. "You will see one of them soon." As soon as the wizard finished speaking, a hall appeared in Erek's vision. More skeletons appeared in the spacious hall, but at the center of these skeletons, a breathtaking corpse involuntarily attracted everyone's attention. It looked like a fox with astonishingly beautiful silver fur all over her body. She floated in the center of the hall with her eyes closed. If it wasn't for the fact that she was already dead, perhaps people would have thought that she was just sleeping. "Dim Ko Hua, this is Ekis' eldest daughter." Erek could not help but murmur to himself, "I didn't expect her to fall here. My lord, you'd better come and see this." After Brando slowly slid down a layer of gray-white ice from above, he heard Medisha, who had gone down first, shout from below. He bypassed a dense patch of icicles and saw Medisha half kneeling at the entrance of a dark ice path in front of him. There was a figure lying next to the Silver Fairy Princess. At first he thought it was Peya's brother, but when he got a little closer he found that it was not. It was a skeleton at least 6 or 7 meters tall. The skeleton was wearing heavy armor, with its head down and sitting on the ground against the ice wall. Its fatal wound should be on its chest. Brando noticed that there was a fist-sized hole in the chest armor of the skeleton where the heart was, apparently pierced by something. This is the skeleton of a frost giant. Brando glanced at the skeleton's physique and made a judgment. It seems that Sheeta did not lie to us. This road does lead to the Holy Cathedral of the Hibernator. Are they the guardians of this holy cathedral? Medisha asked in a low voice. They used to be. Brando replied, "Is this what you want me to see?" "No, there are more similar skeletons ahead. But not all of them are frost giants. There are some strange corpses that even Miss Shido can't recognize." The Silver Elf Princess replied. "What kind, wolf?" Seeing Medisha shake her head, Brando could not help but be curious. It was well known that Milos had fought Ekis here, but what other corpses would there be here besides the bodies of frost giants and the bodies of Ekis children? Human? Unlikely. Brando knew that the scholar lady would never make a mistake on such a matter. He motioned for Medisha to lead the way, and then followed in, and soon found the scholar lady with a puzzled look among the skeletons. Shido was staring at a strange corpse in a daze. To be exact, it was not a corpse, nor was it a skeleton, but a pool of silver, human-shaped liquid. This pool of liquid lay among the corpses of 7 or 8 frost giants, and there was a frost-blue combat sword stuck in it. If it were not for this sword, others might have missed this corpse, and just thought it was a pool of ice water. What is this? Brando saw this thing and could not help but be stunned. P.S. Yesterday I had a discussion with Mother Z and sorted out my thoughts. I'm back, you know. Well, as for the strong heroes who were on their way to kill me yesterday, please go back. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.